Call to order site plan review board meeting for Thursday, March 21st. And we'll start off with introductions. And I usually start over there, but why don't we start with Keith and we'll just keep right on going.
Keith Hafer.
Gene Dunn.
Gary Dugas.
Albert Kolf.
Lee J. Feldman, contract planner for the town.
Chris Osterwader, town engineer. Ben McCall, town attorney.
Okay, thank you. Next item on the agenda. We usually do the minutes at the beginning. Do you mind if I switch them? Just so we have them okay before we proceed. And I'll do a page by page. For the February 15th meeting. Any comments on the first page? The second page? Third page? Number 4. Number 5, page 5. Page 6. Page 7. I've got one comment. Under item 3, board members agreed to hold a public hearing on this application on March 31st. It's supposed to be March 21st. And the last page. Somebody want to make a motion to approve these as amended?
I make a motion to approve the minutes as amended.
I second that.
Any more discussion? All in favor? And opposed? You're abstaining? That's 3 in favor. Next item on the agenda is Hope Cemetery.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Chairman, board members. Tonight is a public hearing on Hope Cemetery expansion to Barnard Lane, map 46, lot 11. As you recall, on January 18th, 2024, the Site Plan Review Board reviewed an application for an expansion of the existing Hope Cemetery located at 2 Barnard Lane, map 46, lot 11. On January 29th, 2024, the Site Plan Board conducted a site walk of the property. The board set a public hearing for this project at the February 15th, 2024 meeting. All outstanding issues have been addressed by the applicant. I won't go through all of the supporting materials, but you do have draft findings of fact in front of you tonight for your action.
And who do we have from the cemetery? Oh, yeah, cemetery.
Hi, Jason Haskell with DM Rome Engineers.
Jason, turn your mic on.
Thank you. Sorry, Jason Haskell with DM Roman Consulting Engineers on behalf of the Hope Cemetery Corporation. So really, the cemetery is looking to expand to the rear of their property between the limits of the existing cemetery. From there to about the beginning of Hope Woods, the conservation land, with all the trails. It's going to include the roads, burial sites, landscaping, all the things that we've talked about in the past. So we have already received our DEP stormwater permit by rules. We also met with the board a few months ago, followed by the site walk. One comment that did come up from the site walk was regarding wayfinding signs throughout the cemetery. That way you know the direction you're supposed to be going in, not just around where the new expansion is going to go, but also some additional signs to get you out of the cemetery, since there are several roads throughout So what we did was we added locations of where we were proposing some signs. The cemetery will create the signs and then place them as according to the plan. As Vijay has brought up, that we have gone through and addressed the comments from the town staff. We do still have one waiver that we would like to discuss and hopefully move forward with regarding the paved parking in exchange for gravel parking, primarily because they're trying to keep with the same character of the existing cemetery. All the parking that is throughout the cemetery is either gravel or hardened paths just from years and years of use. And typically one of the main reasons for having paved parking versus gravel parking is winter maintenance and the rutting and everything that goes along with that. This is not opened or plowed during the winter. You can go in through foot, but that's about the extent of it. You are not going to be driving and parking out here in the winter. So we were hoping that you'd take that into consideration when looking at this waiver. Again, we're here hopefully for final approval and here to answer any questions or that the public has. Thank you.
Any questions from members of the board? Or I open it up to
Can you show the plan that shows where you might propose to put the exit signs?
It was there.
What's going on? There we are.
So we're proposing the exit signs here. So this is where we're proposing the expansion. We'll put an exit sign here to make people turn right, and then just to continue along this outer, I guess, loop, and then to continue out to Route 1. I'm sorry for kicking the tripod.
Anybody else? Not, I'll open it to comments from the public, if anybody wants to comment on Oak Cemetery expansion. Please feel free to come up. So nobody's getting any comments, we'll close the public. Oh, we got one.
Just one. Hi. Debbie Reserve, Longview Terrace. I was just curious, just to double check, I've read all the literature. Is anything going to change along the gravel area there and the tree buffer to Longview? Will that tree conservation area remain the same?
I'm sorry, would you like me to answer the question now or at the end?
No, you can answer it.
Okay. So there's nothing proposed for that section.
Widening or touching that buffer that's in between?
Not that, no, not that's part of this.
Just wanted to double check. Thank you.
Anybody else? I'm going to close the public comment portion of the meeting and we'll proceed. We've got a waiver to do. Do you have that section number for anybody to read it?
No,
That is.
hold on 1 second.
You do?
I do if it helps.
So it's Article 10, Section 9D, 2, off-street parking areas.
That is correct.
Somebody want to make a motion to waive that?
I'll make a motion to waive section 10, article 10, section 9D2, to keep with the existing parking that is at the cemetery presently.
I second the motion.
Any more discussion? All in favor? That's unanimous. Next is the findings of fact. I'll read through them. Plan preserves the natural landscape insofar as practical and adequately uses the natural features of the site and/or new landscaping to define, soften, and screen the impacts of development. That's been met. For a non-residential project, effective buffers are maintained or created between it and adjoining residential properties and residential zoning districts. That's been met. Filling, excavation, and earth moving activity is carried out in a way that keeps erosion and sedimentation to a minimum, and that's been met. There's a note that the grading plan was reviewed and approved by the town engineer. Number 4, adequate provision has been made for surface drainage so that removal of stormwaters will not have an unreasonably adverse effect on neighboring properties, downstream water quality, soil erosion, or the public storm drainage system. And that's been met, and there's a note that the stormwater memo was reviewed and approved by the town engineer. Number 5, adequate provision has been made for water supply and sewage disposal. That does not apply. 6, site plan provides for safe access to and egress from public and private streets with adequate parking and internal circulation. That's been met. 7, vehicular access to the site will be on roads which have adequate capacity to accommodate any additional traffic generated by the development. That's been met. Number 8, the plan provides for safe pedestrian circulation both on-site and off-site. And that's been met. Number 9, exterior lighting does not adversely affect neighboring properties or streets. That doesn't apply, there's no exterior lighting. And 10, electrical and telephone utility lines and components serving the site will be placed in a manner that is not hazardous or unsightly. And that also does not apply. Somebody want to make a motion to accept the findings of fact?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Opposed, and that's unanimous. Next, the board, in their review, the board finds that the criteria of Article 11, Section 8, zoning ordinance has been met with conditions and/or waivers noted above and listed below. We've got
Mr. Chairman, I will need to add the waiver tonight that you
Okay.
just granted. I couldn't do that without that approval.
We've got 4 submission waivers which were granted 2 months ago. Section 6A3J, location, dimension, ground floor elevations of all buildings was waived. 6A3V, location and existing and proposed exterior lighting and utilities was waived. High-intensity soil was waived. And 6B8, analysis of adjacent street system capacity was waived. And that's it. We can have them.
Yeah, well, tonight's waiver,
Oh, yeah,
10-9,
yeah,
D2.
yeah. Off-street parking.
Yes, I'll, excuse me, I will add that into the findings for you and have it available for you to come in to sign.
Can I have a motion to approve the project then?
So moved.
A second.
I second the motion to approve.
Any more discussion? All in favor? Opposed? That's unanimous.
Thank you very much.
You're all set?
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is the Red Barn Inn.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So tonight is a public hearing for an application for site plan amendment to 421 Alfred Road, map 23, lot 20. The property was before the staff review committee in 2009 for the approval of a kennel. At that time, the applicant requested to limit the number of animals at the kennel to 15 dogs and 8 cats. The staff review committee listed this as a condition of approval, though the ordinance does not have a performance standard regarding how many animals can be kept in the kennel. The current property owner, Simpson Rental LLC, is before the board to remove this condition. The site walk was conducted on March 13th, 2024. The applicant has submitted supplemental information on March 13th, 2024, which is included in this agenda. Again, it's fairly lengthy. I won't go through it. It's listed for you right up on the screen there. And again, tonight is a public hearing, so you can open that as you choose.
Do we have somebody from the kennel?
Hello, Kristen Collins, attorney for Red Barn Inn. And I think there's not that much to talk about that we didn't already address at the prior meeting, so I'll just touch on the things that have changed. As we showed you at the site walk, the intention now is for a more effective solution for both screening the dogs from view and screening the dog's view of other things outside of the kennels, as well as noise. The decision's been made that instead of that composite privacy fence that had originally been proposed, the applicant is wanting to install this acoustical fence that we provided information on. And we are providing that information just to show you what it's going to look like. Again, it's our position that the noise itself is not relevant to the standards, but what is relevant is that we took away the fence that was originally proposed, and this material is going to be laid on the inside of the fence line, on the outside of the fence line where depicted on this newly revised plan. The other thing that's noted on the plan is that fence line that is closest to the abutting property line is going to be moved inward, that chain link fence for the kennel, to comply with that 50-foot setback standard. So it has not been moved yet, but the plan indicates that it will be, and the way I would suggest the board would handle that is just as a condition of approval, that the fence line be moved and measured by the code enforcement officer to make sure it complies with that 50 feet. There were initially comments from the fire chief concerned with whether there could be access to that barn in the back. Just for the record, the barn in the back is not used as part of the kennel facility. It's just general storage for the property. However, the fire chief has been out to the property. He indicated that there's plenty of room to get around on the, I guess it would be the northwest side of the property, to reach the barn in the unlikely event of a fire back there. And also, he took a look at the parking area and confirmed that there's plenty of room to turn around, either in that empty paddock area or in the parking lot itself. So he had no further concerns about that. So I think that effectively addressed everything that was initially raised by the fire chief. I think he also felt comfortable with interior measures for fire safety. Not that they're necessarily relevant to the site plan, but just to demonstrate this is a safe project. Again, our position is that the change in the number of dogs is not something that should have been a condition in the first place, and should not be a condition now, although the applicant is representing that we're going to keep it to 85 dogs. which is a reduction from the number of dogs that have been there under the prior ownership. And we do think that, as to the concerns that are likely to be raised about noise, not relevant to the board standards, however, this acoustic fence should go a very long way and has been an effective solution for kennels and animal shelters. And the supplier has a lot of great stories of how that's been effective. And certainly Audra, the owner of the kennel, wants to make sure that we're doing as much as possible to address those concerns outside of this process. So I anticipate a lot of public comment. If the chair wouldn't mind that we just reserve some comments to the end to respond to anything that was raised.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, thank you. And are there questions for me?
Oh, no, I guess we're set.
All right, thanks for your time.
Nobody's got questions, then I'll open the public comment portion of the meeting. And you have to go up to the podium, we have to have your name, and I believe that's it.
Good evening, board. My name is Scott Ellis. I've been a resident of Westwoods Road since 1998, 11 years prior to the establishment of the Red Barn Inn. Excuse me, and I have served as president of Westwoods Homeowners Association for 24 years. For the past 2.5 years or so, I, along with Jeff McCorkle, who is in a butter and will be presenting shortly, has spent hundreds of total combined hours reaching out to town officials and Red Barn Inn owners, desperately seeking a solution and respite to the group dog barking issue that has been negatively impacted the peaceful rural existence of neighbors in the kennel. As I prepared my thoughts for tonight's meeting, I can easily hear the group barking of dogs from the Red Barn Inn from inside my home, windows closed, with my home situated nearly 1,500 feet from the kennel. This is a common and consistent daily occurrence over the past 4 years. Worse in the warmer months when my house windows are open. If it's bothersome to me at such a distance from Red Barn Inn, imagine the impact on those who live closer or our abutters. I'd like you to listen to one of the dozens of recordings that we have of group dog barking that have been recorded by neighbors. Give me 1 second to pull it up here. Imagine living in your home where barking like this consistently occurs 14 hours a day, waking you at 6 a.m., continuing into the 8:30 p.m. evening hours. Picture sitting on your deck trying to relax or read a book after work and hearing this nonstop. How would you feel if this was your day-to-day home life experience? Neighbors are not looking to shut down the Red Barn Inn, but the barking situation has become wildly out of control, worsened by the seasonal loss of any buffer with fall foliage loss, and neighbors are well beyond simply frustrated. We are now 3+ years into enduring the torturous barking emitted from the Red Barn Inn, present 14 hours per day, every day. Neighbors are frustrated with the town's delayed and often lack of response to our concerns, the town's chosen path for enforcement, and its decision to only impose a notice of violation for 2 conditions of the 2009 minor site plan, while the Red Barn Inn has and continues to operate in violation of numerous conditions of the 2009 minor site plan. As an option to complying with the 2009 site plan conditions, the town has allowed the owner to propose an amendment to the original town site plan regarding the number of dogs permitted at the kennel. The town has chosen to not impose enforcement during this amendment process, even with clear and willful noncompliance and disregard for the 2009 site plan, town ordinances, and Red Barn Inn neighbors. Per town ordinances, the amendment process to a site plan is a separate ordinance and process than the noncompliance and enforcement ordinance per Articles 4, 5, and 11, which shall be done in conjunction with each other until such time the amendment process is complete and enforceable. Neighbors are most frustrated with the multiple Red Barn Inn owners' disregard and disrespect for its neighbors, continuing to house large groups of dogs outdoors, emitting extreme barking noise, even after knowingly receiving noise complaints and requests for improvement. The non-compliance and violations are clear, egregious, and at this point, willful. The amendment proposal to the 2009 site plan approval before you and the responses provided by Mrs. Simpson's attorney on behalf of the Red Barn are lacking with some required information to incorporate inaccurate statements and elusive responses. Most important, the amendment proposal lacks an acceptable and verifiable solution to mitigate the parking noise, which was the essence of the conditions placed in the 2009 site plan approval. The situation we are in now, with incessant loud group dog barking, is exactly why in 2009, when Mark and Linda Lawrence proposed a dog grooming and boarding facility on their property at 421 Alfred Road, that I, who was a resident there, and most of the Westwood's homeowners residents at that time, turned out to the June 9, 2009 Kennebunk Staff Review Committee public hearing regarding the original Red Barn Inn proposal to express our concerns regarding noise generated from barking dogs at such a facility. Most neighbors then, as today, were dog owners themselves. Again, were not against dogs. The issue at hand then, as it is the case now, was concern about the noise impact of outdoor group barking of dogs on neighbors of the Red Barn Inn. Minutes of that meeting that were provided finally by the town after numerous requests reflect concerns from neighbors back in 2009 regarding the potential for outside dog group barking emitted from Red Barn Inn and the impact on the abutters and neighbors' quality of life and even property values. Original owners Mark and Linda Lawrence, who already had prior experience running a dog and cat grooming business in Kennebunk called Raining Cats and Dogs, assured neighbors at that time that their facility would be fully enclosed to house the dogs, there would be no groups of dogs outdoors, and that they specifically designed their operation to provide these pets a home environment with a lot of one-on-one care. From the minutes of that meeting, which should be available in your packets, Mrs. Lawrence notes that, quote, "The outside will not change except for the new barn proposed for horses," unquote, and there will be, quote, "sufficient staff to walk them on leashes," unquote, and that the play area, which is depicted in drawings as inside the Red Barn Inn building that you have, will primarily be for rainy days or if a dog is older and cannot walk well. Mrs. Lawrence also stated that, quote, the Red Barn Inn, would be set up like a house with baby monitors, nightly checks, and will be soundproofed, unquote. She also commented that excessively barking dogs would not be invited back. She indicated that sheetrock, quote, "sheetrock, soundboard, and or insulation will help to keep the noise down," quote. When Mrs. Lawrence was asked about the chances of their business growing, she replies they could be limited to the 15 dogs they requested in their application, and they will also be inspected by the state. Mr. Lawrence also stated there would be no runs. He also addressed the concern neighbors had with even one-on-one walking of dogs too close to properties of dog owners, possibly triggering barking from butters dogs. He indicated that in regards to walking dogs, they could keep to the area furthest away from butters. A member of the staff review committee at that time, Police Chief Robert McKenzie, commented at the hearing that, quote, "barking may not be an issue since this barn will be heated and will be enclosed, plus the Lawrences also live on site. The current owner does not live on site." In the minutes, Town of Kennebunk Code Enforcement Officer Demers confirmed at the meeting that kennels are allowed in the rural residential district as long as they are located on at least 3 acres and that they are no closer than 50 feet from any property line. We've heard tonight that the kennel fence does not meet that criteria. However, quote, "the staff review process does add in more approval/criteria standards to allow for other conditions. With this in mind, and as a means of addressing the concerns of abutters regarding dog barking at that time, the Lawrences agreed to 10 conditions of approval of the minor site plan. Most of the conditions were placed specifically to address noise concerns. Some of those, so noise can be considered as a concern in the situation. Some of the concerns and conditions included proper installation standards to be installed to reduce noise. When walking dogs, note there is no reference keeping the dogs outdoors. Applicants will be aware of impact to butters. Use limited to 15 dogs. Code office will be copied on state inspections annually. There is no record of a state license or inspection issued to the state until this September 23, after notice of violation was issued. Existing buffer will be preserved. Best management practices will be incorporated in all applicable construction, and lighting specifications for full cut-off fixtures to be submitted to CEO for approval. Lights for the unapproved exterior kennels currently shine in the butters' properties. This 2009 agreement with the above conditions is fully enforceable. With these above conditions of approval in place, the 1,080 square foot boarding and grooming facility was approved by the staff review committee. This number, 1,080 square foot insulated building, is key as we look at the immense unpermitted expansion of the originally approved 2009 kennel to its current operational size of 3,305 square foot total interior kennel space and 8,799 square feet external kennel area, there was a 300 square foot outside fenced-in area documented on the 2009 drawings. And the impact that expansion and a dramatic unimproved shift to outdoor kennel operations has had with regards to the current group dog barking issue. Contrary to the kennel's attorney statements, the Red Barn Inn has drastically changed in size and scope of operation since the 2009 approval, roughly 1,000% increase in size. For the first decade of the Red Barn Inn boarding and grooming operation, before any of the above mentioned expansion, the facility seemed to be operating in line with the conditions of approval. In as much as Westwoods Road neighbors noticed no issues of barking, there were no complaints, and we were living harmoniously with the Red Barn Inn. The kennel did not appear to house dogs outdoors, and there were no evidence of group dog barking. We attribute this peaceful coexistence of the dogs being housed in a properly insulated indoor kennel, indicating that the conditions placed as a result of the 2009 site plan approval to address barking concerns of abutters were working and they were effective. On May 2, 2016, the Lawrences sold the 421 Alfred Road property, including the kennel, to Charles Kukas, who seemed to operate the kennel within reason of the 2009 plan restrictions until 2020, when he began expanding the exterior kennel space without town permits. It was at that point when the noise levels from barking began to be noticeable and increased. With each successive sale of the property, unpermitted expansion of some indoor, and primarily outdoor physical kennel operations led to increased number of dogs, most kept outdoors, which led to increased volume and frequency of barking issues. While the current owner of the Red Barn Inn wants you to believe that the amendment before you is a simple request to increase the number of dogs to align with the kennel's current operational status, this current operational status is in direct violation of numerous additional conditions of the 2009 agreement that involve unapproved kennel expansion and unapproved outdoor kennel housing of dogs, all of which has resulted in the dog barking issue that triggered the noise issues we are experiencing now. Ms. Simpson seeks to increase the limit of dogs from the 2009 site plan approval of 15 dogs housed in an insulated interior kennel space to 80 dogs, mostly housed outdoors, expecting the board to simply ignore the fact that by continuing its unpermitted keeping of dogs outdoors, regardless of whether it is 15 dogs or 80 dogs, is in direct violation of the 2009 agreement and is resulting in the excessive group dog barking, exactly the issue in 2009 that we tried to avoid, that the agreement addressed. At the recent March 13, 2024 public site walk of Red Barn Inn, Ms. Simpson apparently chose to close her kennel to daily boarders, so there were no dogs in the outdoor chain link kennel space. She indicated there were approximately 20 dogs housed within the indoor kennel space. Even with a group of roughly 20 people walking around the exterior of the indoor kennel space while dogs were housed indoors, there was zero barking could be heard outside, even on the kennel property. This would seem to validate the success of insulated indoor kennel space in controlling and mitigating the noise issues that cannot be mitigated by housing groups of dogs in outdoor kennel space, which is probably why the owner choose not to allow dogs boarders the day of the walk, and exactly why the conditions of proper installation standards and best management practices were required for the approval of the site plan for this indoor kennel in 2009. Westwoods Road resident and direct abutter to Red Barn Inn, Jeff McCorkle, will provide you with additional information pertinent to the amendment proposal before you today and summarize the past 3 years of neighbors of the kennel reaching out to past and current kennel owners and town officials regarding the incessant and daily parking concerns from the Red Barn Inn. His detailed presentation is critical and necessary to obtain an understanding of the extent to which the Red Barn Inn's violations of the conditions of 2009 site plan approval has negatively impacted the quality of life of the surrounding neighbors, and why we are opposed to any amendment to the existing 2009 site plan agreement that does not include verifiable and enforceable conditions that require the kennel to fully mitigate the group dog barking noise by carrying forward the original 2000 site plan conditions, which require proper installation standards and best management practices for noise control. All conditions of the 2009 site plan are enforceable, and any amendment should carry forward and abide by those conditions. Any new conditions placed as a result of an amendment must equally guarantee those noise mitigation issues, must be verifiable and enforceable, and must permit neighbors and abutters to enjoy the peace and quiet of their property unencumbered by incessant group dog barking. The 2009 site plan conditions were successful in achieving the intended peace and quiet for over a decade because the owners of the Red Barn Inn adhered to the conditions and there were not groups of dogs outdoors barking. Based on the kennel's current operation, proposed amendment to continue to keep up to 80 dogs per day in an outdoor kennel setting, the only verifiable and proven means of fully controlling group barking noise as specified and intended in the 2009 site plan would be for conditions to be placed that require the dogs to be housed within properly insulated indoor kennel space. As compassionate community members, we hope the board can understand the significant impact of the Red Barn Inn's operation on the quality of life of fellow Kennebunk citizens, and will choose a course of action that returns peace to the neighbors of the Red Barn Inn. It has been said in social media that Kennebunk is a dog-friendly community. We are also a people-friendly community. There is a solution where both can coexist if the Red Barn Inn wishes to be a good neighbor. I'd like to have Jeff McCorkle come up to continue this presentation in terms of our remarks regarding the site plan amendment in place. Thank you.
PowerPoint, give it to you. Mr. Chairman. I'd like to bring a PowerPoint to present.
Could you do it without it?
I really need to show like the expansion. I'll try to keep it concise.
Okay.
What's the best way to? I've got the.
Jeff, I'm not going to be able to plug your mouse in.
Okay,
So
I can hit.
Just tell me when.
Yeah,
when you
why
want it.
don't I just say like next?
Yeah.
So I can't show this video, but I'd like to show. Sorry, give me one quick second here. So this is a video from, it was video, but this is in my backyard. And it's a good comparison of what I listen to 700 feet away, and my daughter starts talking.
get close to the microphone?
So that's a good comparison of my daughter talking and the dog barking we hear 14 hours a day. I'll start, but good evening, members of the board, Mr. Chairman. My name is Jeff McCorkle. I'm a resident of Westwoods Road. My house is 650 feet away from the Red Barn Inn and extremely impacted by the barking noise. First off, we're here today because of the extreme barking noise coming from the Red Barn Inn. There have been countless barking noise complaints on the Red Barn Inn for years at this point, which has prompted the investigation on the property, the notice of violation imposed by the town staff, and as which prompted the proposed amendment in front of you today. The barking noise is the problem. I am personally a dog owner, as many neighbors are, and I utilize boarding facilities time to time. This is not per se a dog issue, this is a noise and compliance issue. We will not say the dog daycare boarding facility in our town is not a needed service, or that the Red Barn Inn is not a good business, or has poor customer service. Per Red Barn Inn clients' letters that were publicized last Friday, that were sent in, and I'm sure that you'll hear tonight, and you can see many supporters. Red Barn Inn has awesome customer service, good pricing, good hours, flexibility. That current owner has implemented new things to the Red Barn Inn to make it better for its clients. And the kennel is a much needed service for residents in this town and surrounding towns. We will not dispute any of that. There is no concern for the animals being kept there. We as neighbors are addressing a compliance issue and a noise issue from a commercial business in a residential zone, a business that is non-compliance with any aspect of their site plan and is out of compliance with 3 town ordinances. 4 years ago, when the barking volumes increased and discussions started happening between neighbors about the noise, and we started discussing at our HOA meetings. I am somewhat speaking on behalf of many neighbors. I volunteered to try to spearhead this, and also I'm speaking on behalf to eliminate some redundancy. But many of them will still speak out tonight. So on behalf of residents from many neighborhoods, Westwoods, Drolla, Jeffreys Way, Mabry, Stonington, Eastwoods, Patriot, Turf, and Alfred Road, all confirmed negatively impacted at various levels by the continuous incessant loud barking emitted from the Red Barn Inn. Please accept what I'm about to share. So some comments that we've received from neighbors: barking is constant every day of the week. It's disturbing any peace we have here. I'm totally against the Red Barn Inn being able to take more than 15 dogs. I can hear them barking living 3/10 of a mile away. This place is definitely disturbing the peace in this neighborhood. While I would never want to put them out of business, I feel it's imperative they enclose these dogs instead of having them outside. Relentless barking and howling has a huge impact on our ability to be outside. The dogs barking daily, all day long, is an extreme nuisance and highly annoying. So sorry for the dogs too. It can't be good for them either. The barking is relentless. It's surprising how much we can hear considering our distance from the Red Barn Inn. We can definitely hear the constant barking. The barking noise situation progressively worsened over the past 4 years, as Scott alluded to. So we've been complaining for 2, so we're pretty well beyond frustrated living with this noise. The Red Barn Inn's in their 14th year since they've opened. The barking was the #1 concern when they first opened. We coexisted well from 2009 to 2020, and it's during the past few years that has not been the case. So could you go to the next slide, please? So a quick highlight of the history. 2009, the Kennebunk, the town approved the site plan. Mark and Linda Lawrence operated from 2009 to 2016 within the restrictions of the site plan. Charles Kukas purchased it in 2016. The kennel was a good neighbor from 2009 to 2020. In mid-2020 is when expansion started. And that's when we started having the noise issue. We started addressing the noise with Mr. Kukas, then Mr. Clough purchased the property in 2022, continued addressing the noise, Spring 2022 is when we formally started submitting complaints to the town because of no progress with the owners. And Audra Simpson purchased the property in March of 2023, and the barking continues to be an issue today, severely an issue. Next slide, please. To highlight a few documents from the original 2009 site plan, it clearly defines a 30 by 36 structure with notes on the existing building to be converted into a grooming and boarding facility with clear dimensions and no defined outside play areas. Next slide. Another clear document stating the Red Barn Inn existing building to be converted, the 30 by 36 structure with no outside playpens. Next slide. This is a drawing of the inside of the kennel at the time. It defines a few play areas. The two areas on the right are defined as play areas, but they're not defined as outside play areas. And there's no dimensions to indicate that this wouldn't be inside of the 30 by 36 structure. Next slide. This was on the application. It clearly says change existing horse barn into dog grooming and kennel, not changing the size, just the interior walls. Existing size 30 by 36. Next slide. Last document that clearly says existing building to be converted into grooming facility. Next slide. Clear site plan conditions worth mentioning. Scott went through them, but I'll highlight them real quick. But the site plan clearly states 1,000 square feet, and they're currently operating 12,100 square feet. Proper insulation standards to be installed to reduce noise. They currently operate an open chain link kennel area with no means to contain noise. Hours of operation will be 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. every day. They house dogs outside about 6:30 to 8:30 or 9 every day. And they board dogs 24/7, 365. When walking dogs, the applicant will be aware of the impacts on abutters. They don't walk dogs one-on-one. They house large numbers of dogs outside. Notable comments: no outside runs, limited to 15 dogs, no opportunities for barking to upset them and neighbors. Barking may not be an issue since the barn will be heated and will be enclosed. Will be soundproofed and enclosed. Proper insulation standards to be installed to reduce noise. Sufficient staff to walk them on leashes. Excessively barking dogs would not be invited back. Sheetrock and soundboard for installation to contain noise. Anytime a dog is outside, it will be on a leash. I don't need to read the rest. You have the site plan in front of you tonight. Next slide. Notable to mention that per the 2009 site plan, the kennel is required to have a state of Maine kennel license. They operated from June 25th, 2009 to June 28th, 2023, 14 years without a Maine state kennel license. That was confirmed by the state. The kennel has never been inspected by the state. The first license was received by the current owner, and per Maine state statutes, they'd be subject to $255,000 to $1 million in retroactive fines from operating that amount of time without a state of Maine kennel license. Next slide. Hours of operation in the site plan: 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. every day. The kennel operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Monday through Friday, their daycare 7 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. They do 24 hours for boarding. What's key to note in our issue is the dogs are outside from 6:30 a.m., 6:30, and to 8:30 at night. That's 14 hours every day, all day, Monday through Friday. During the weekends and holiday schedules, the dogs are outside. Pretty structured, but we had an environmental noise monitoring report done, and that shows 6:30 a.m. to 11, 2 to 5, and 7 to 8:30. Those hours have been adjusted and improved minor recently. Next slide, please. So I want the board to understand, there's been a lot of comments about this business has run and hasn't changed since it opened. I have evidence here. So the site plan was 1,080 square feet. In 2012, Google Earth shows interior space of 1,225 square feet, an outside play area of 256, so 1,481 square feet. In 2018, 1,225 interior square feet, 1,800 exterior for a total of 3,000. And in 2022, 3,305 interior square feet, 8,799 exterior kennel space for a total of 12,104. That's an expansion of 1,020% since the site plan. But it's key to note the expansion from 2018 to 2022. Next slide, please. This is a street view of the exact conditions when the kennel opened. You can see the existing 30 by 36 barn, and I have referenced the note that they would not be changing the size, just the interior walls. Next slide, please. What slide number are we on? Do you mind?
13?
Okay, thank you. This was Google Earth image from May 2010, roughly when they opened. The green highlights the approved 1,080 square feet. The orange highlights the gray area of the 300 square feet exterior space, but it's gray, it wasn't clearly defined. That could have been meant to be inside, and the red area was not referenced at all. Next slide. 2018, continued expansions, but we did not have barking issues then. Next slide. Google Earth from October 2021, and these are the current conditions. You can see on the right, the highlighted area in red is their current operations. What was originally approved is in green. So drastic expansions, and you can tell the outside kennel space is huge. Next slide. This was their realtor drone footage from when the current owner purchased the property, just showing the current conditions, more in high def. Next slide. This is a great image, drone footage from the realtor, from the current owner when she purchased the property in 2023. What's highlighted in green was what was approved. The orange area was an exterior space utilized for the majority of the existence of the Red Barn Inn, but no dog barking issue. It's when they've made this monstrous outside kennel space and house dogs there is where we hear the barking. Next slide. This is just the boundary survey that the current owner submitted, just highlighting what was approved and what their current operation is. Next slide. 421 Alfred Road is currently operating with 2 principal uses and 3 accessory uses. This is just outlining the property. Just to reference the next slide, please. In February 9th of 2019, there was an administrative consent agreement that was published. There was multiple infractions. There was too many accessory dwellings on the property. They had 4 rental dwellings. They're only allowed to have 1 principal and 1 accessory. So they had 1 principal, 3 accessories. The kennel was failed to be referenced during that time, which it was operational. The resolution, they had to reduce the number of rental dwellings by January 1st, 24. Unknown if that's happened. And the current owner has until 2025 to live on the property. And it's worth, I bring this up because it's worth mentioning, there's a lot of talk of neighbor to neighbor. The current owner is not a neighbor, they're a business owner, and that's how we feel as neighbors. We've been treated as, not as a neighbor, but as a business owner with business mentality first. I want to highlight the current violations of town ordinances, not just the site plan. The town has pretty strict noise ordinance, residential 55 during the day and 45 at night. The performance standard, Article 10, Section 19, Item B, the kennel has to stay with more than 50 feet from any property line. They've said that will be corrected, but it's worth mentioning. Article 3, Section 4.2, no person shall own, keep, or harbor any dog which by frequent or habitual barking, howling, yelping shall disturb any peace or any person. This section shall not apply to the Animal Welfare Society, but it applies to the Red Barn Inn, and they're clearly in violation. Next slide. It's worth mentioning that countless studies, group barking produces 100 to 120 decibels. That's a fact. That's equivalent to, I've lost my page. What slide number, please?
22.
Thank you. Professional studies, 120 decibels is considered extremely loud and or dangerous, and similar to the noise of concerts, chainsaws, jackhammers, impact wrenches, motorcycles, jet airplanes, thunder, and sirens. Next slide. After trying to deal with past owners and submitting complaints to the town and not getting anywhere, the Westwoods Homeowners Association, we voted to invest our own money into an environmental noise monitoring report. So Specto Technology provided us with an environmental monitoring program utilizing industry-leading equipment, software solutions provided by Sonita Systems. The continuous data collection period was Sunday, June 25th, 23 through Tuesday, July 11th, 2023, 24 hours a day. Measurements were conducted at 3 locations on Westwood's property, hundreds of feet away. And the data, the testing was in compliance with all the requirements the town outlines. The testing, this is what the testing shows. It continuously 60, 65, up to 75 decibels from 6 a.m. to 8 o'clock at night. And that's what we hear. Those are the videos we've submitted, and we had an environmental noise monitoring report done. This is from Wednesday, July 5th. Next slide. This is an example of the weekend. Clearly shows when the dogs are outside, then they go get let back in, they're back outside, let back in, back outside. They're usually outside in 3 increments. So we usually only get 2 windows of no barking on the weekends. Next slide. Don't really need to dive into this, but the kennel encroached the 50-foot buffer. The boundary survey has a 20-foot setback, which is right here. And they mark 21 feet, so they're 41 feet from the setback, both the exterior kennel and the barn, so they've encroached 9 feet. Next slide. Documents have been submitted to the town indicating only a portion of the barn is used, which would be the side away from the property line. Facebook photos, and from what we've seen, the dogs, it's used to house dogs. It's used as part of the kennel. That entire barn is used for the kennel. Next slide. We looked at 29 kennels in southern Maine. The Red Barn Inn is the most unique kennel of all of the southern Maine kennels from, I believe we went up to Falmouth. All of the kennels in southern Maine are 100% indoors, have exterior kennel space located in a commercial zone, have 0 residential neighbors, or exterior kennel enclosed with sound barrier and or tree buffer. Large numbers of town in southern Maine do not even allow kennels within their town. Next slide. The town of Kennebunk, unfortunately, has minimal ordinances pertaining to kennels that are permitted. Only the performance standards currently exist, which you guys are aware. Here are a few examples of what other towns have in place. Located in an enclosed building, shall be fully enclosed. All pens, runs, or kennels or other facilities shall be designed, constructed, and located on a site in such a manner that will minimize adverse effects on the surrounding properties, the relationship and location of residences, and other similar factors. Require distances much further than what the town of Kennebunk requires, and requirements on certain heights, and all buildings shall be exclusive and constructed of masonry for noise control. So examples, it's a very common practice for kennels to be inside, so the kennel owner can't say that it's not doable. might not be the best for their particular situation, but it is doable to manage and run a commercial kennel inside with commercial floor mats designed for dogs to do what they need to do. Next slide. We've talked to, like I said, I'm kind of speaking on behalf of many neighbors, but neighbors from Westwoods, Drolla, Jeffries Way, Mabry Lane, Stonington, Eastwoods, Patriot, Turf, and Alfred Road have all given feedback on the noise level and impact on their respective properties. Here's a heat map that was made to reflect the feedback from neighbors of the negative impact on properties. The barking is extreme in impacting the quality of life to neighbors within that 1,000-foot circle, which is primarily Westwoods, Drolla, and Alfred. Barking is high to medium nuisance to homes 1,500 feet away, and the barking can be heard up to 2,500 feet away. Next slide. It's worth mentioning the barking that we have been enduring is drastically impacting our property values. The neighborhood is the top 3 factor for homes. Local professionals and industry leading companies advise articles that property value loss can be 15 to 20% from barking. I personally talked to a realtor, and he came to my house, listened to the barking, and he thought I would take a hit of 20% on my property. Next slide. So the proposed fence that the applicant is putting in front of you today, it's a proposed Acusta fence, only 8 feet high. So I'm not a sound engineer, but I've done a lot of research. I've spoken to Acustablock myself, and the height of the barrier, the angle and the directed path of the sound has to be considered. If the fence is 8 feet tall with their current kennel space, that's a 10-degree angle or a 3-degree angle for the sound just to travel straight over the barrier and for us to still hear it. It's not going to be effective at what they're currently proposing. Next slide. So sound engineering, sound travel, and angles need to be a consideration. Our research shows that a 45-degree angle in conjunction with a sound barrier would have to be obtained. As you can see, the lower the sound barrier, from the higher the noise, and we're being advised that the kennel would have to compartmentalize and shrink their exterior kennels with tall sound barrier in order for the sound to be contained inside, which really isn't even sustainable with their current layout. Next slide. Here's just an example of if they put the barrier on their 8-foot fence. You can see the amount of dogs they have outside. The dogs are up on spools and toys, and it's a great play yard for dogs. It's a great environment for dogs. Not disputing it, but the noise is traveling straight over and affecting neighbors. And even if they put up a sound barrier on the existing fence, it's not going to do anything. It's not going to be effective. The sound barrier's effectiveness decreases the further the sound gets from the sound barrier. As the angle decreases, the sound travels straight over the sound barrier, and it's not as effective. Next slide. Scott already mentioned it, but the site walk, the dogs were kept inside. You guys didn't hear barking. The dogs weren't outside. It would have been nice to have dogs outside for you guys to see and hear what we do, but it confirms the fact that when the dogs are housed inside a building, there's not an issue. Next slide. So the town officials, including the town manager, community development director, deputy director, town planner, town engineer, and code enforcement officers have been provided electronic copies of the majority of all of this information prior to this case entering the site plan review board. The town staff, knowing the full scope of the severity of the situation, the non-compliance posed by neighbors with the supporting documents, has chosen the best course of action for the site plan review board to handle this case. Thus, the town staff is confident that the site plan review board will review this case in its entirety, not just the quantity of dogs, in order to amend the site plan and or place new conditions to mitigate the barking noise the neighbors have been enduring. It's currently The board's responsibility to fully understand the issue at hand to ensure the outcome of this process will eliminate the barking noise issue at hand, which is why we are here today. The resolution must be guaranteed to eliminate the barking noise and sustainable for the future and potential future owners. Red Barn Inn must contain the barking noise within town ordinance parameters within the walls of the kennel. The town has strict ordinance for noise, resulting in the barking must be nearly eliminated, not just lowered, as ambient noise is equivalent to the current town ordinance decibel levels, as you saw in the decibel monitoring report. The site plan review board must either deny the application and enforce the existing plan and its conditions, as the kennel primarily complied with the first decade of its operation, and enclosed business with the installation standards to reduce noise in walking dogs one-on-one. Or the board must, which is within its power, clearly clarify a condition that is already in place, require the kennel to be an enclosed business. Impose similar verbiage conditions that surrounding town ordinance have. All kennels must be within an enclosed building. You must keep the dogs inside an enclosed structure, as is a standard and doable business practice. This practice is confirmed with the board site walk from not hearing the dogs when they're inside. The business can house the dogs inside the current structures, or the property layout can accommodate the building of a larger structure to house the quantity of dogs. The quantity of dogs is not our concern, it's the barking. Regardless of the board's decision, we request the kennel keep the dogs inside the enclosed building until such time the Red Barn Inn changes the structure of the business to comply with the current or revised conditions of the site. It's not acceptable for us to continue to endure this. We're 6 months past the notice of violation. We're multiple years into complaining. It's cut and dry, it's clear. It's torture. I live it every day, all day. I work from home. I can hear it from my home office. My clients can hear it on the other side of conference calls. There's no hiding from the dog barking. It's not like, don't look at it. It's hearing. This was supposed to be a small business. Again, we're not anti-dogs. We don't want to shut the kennel down. We want to live in peace. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Any questions? I tried to go through that fast. Sorry.
We're all set.
Thank you. Sure, yes. I actually have, I'll give it to you. If you can.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else?
Hello, my name is Laura McCorkle. Thank you for your time. Like I said, my name is Laura. I have lived on Westwoods Road with my husband for 5 years. I have 2 small children under the age of 4, and we have a dog named Ellie. I'm speaking with you today because I live in this community, I work in this community. I'm raising my children in this community. And I have enjoyed the wonderful sense of community that Kennebunk offers. Kennebunk is our home. We purposely moved to a rural residential area of Kennebunk for a peaceful environment where we could watch our children grow up while enjoying the outdoors. Having lived here since 2019, I have seen the drastic changes that have occurred at the Red Barn Inn under the management of 3 different owners over the last 5 years. During the first few years that we lived here, there was no issue with the dog barking throughout the neighborhood. You might hear an occasional bark from a neighboring dog or a dog outside, but it was consistent with residential neighborhood noise. Nothing that disturbed day-to-day life. The barking from the Red Barn Inn is not just occasional barking, but it's a very large group of dogs continuously barking, howling, and yelping. I have heard people say, "Why now?" or "But this is how it's always been." However, as someone who actually lives here and lives in this neighborhood, I can assure you that's not accurate. And it certainly has not always been this way. As you have just learned through the previous presentation, the Red Barn Inn has expanded exponentially, and it's changed its practices, leaving the dogs in large groups outside for extended periods of time. There is a very vast difference, as I'm sure you can see, between 15 dogs being kept inside and more than 80 dogs outside all day long. Previously, every morning that the weather allows, I would sit on my deck before my family wakes up and enjoy a cup of coffee before our hectic day starts. Throughout the years, I've listened to the barking volumes progressively increase, starting as early as 6 a.m. because that's how early I get up to beat my children up, before waking up, I mean. And I can't even have that. I can't even have peace on my back deck at 6 a.m. Because that's when they come outside. Like many Mainers, we like to enjoy our deck once the weather warms up in the spring. We have not been able to do that for the past few years because the barking is very annoying and torturous. We have started to stay inside, but we can still hear it from inside our house. The barking goes as late as 8:30 or 9 p.m. some nights. I also want to take a moment to address some concerns that have come up since this issue has been made public. Recently, I have seen online chatter on community pages, specifically from employees of the Red Barn Inn, stating they just want to shut us down and tell them to leave their pitchforks at home. This is not the truth, and it has never been the truth. We completely understand the need for quality dog care in this community. And we actually used the Red Barn Inn ourselves when we first moved in. Ellie was a frequent flyer at the Red Barn Inn daycare until this issue escalated so much that we couldn't support the business any longer. Ironically, we considered living close to the dog kennel a benefit when we bought our home. However, over the last 4 years of living next to the kennel, a business that is wildly out of compliance with its site plan, it's become a nightmare, and it's miserable to be outside with our kids and enjoy our yard. We can't have birthday parties, we don't have barbecues anymore, we can't simply sit outside and enjoy our deck or wind down after a long day of work. So, I want to be very clear on this. We have never asked for the Red Barn Inn to be shut down, never. And you may have heard the new catchphrase going around, long live the Red Barn Inn. And yes, we agree. But we ask that the Red Barn Inn plays by the rules that were put in place and agreed upon when the business was approved to operate in a rural residential zone. Listen, we love a small business. We love women-owned business. This is great. But what we don't love is a neighbor that's ignoring the rules at the cost and detriment of its neighbors, and it's willfully continuing to ignore complaints year after year. So we kindly ask that you address the barking noise issue with a long-term, sustainable, and mutually agreed upon solution. Next, this is the one that's been really hard. I want to take a moment to address safety. I'm asking Audra and her staff to please put a stop to your supporters who are driving up and down our street at very high rates of speed, honking and yelling, "Long live the Red Barn Inn," or "Save the Red Barn Inn." Like I said, we hear you, we agree, but this isn't helping anything. I have 2 small kids who frequently walk in the street, as do many of their neighbors. It is a dead-end street, and this behavior is unsafe. Please stop. We have asked kindly and respectfully to come to a mutual resolution on this issue for years. We have stayed off social media out of respect for your business, but we haven't received the same in return. Neighbors should not have been put in this position. We shouldn't have to spend our free time and our resources dealing with this when there was a legal document from 2009 that was put into place to protect against this exact scenario. And lastly, I want to conclude by saying, we're really not the enemy. Audra, I understand and I empathize the position that you're in. I do. This isn't fair to you either. From the accounts of your clients, you're a very kind person, a wonderful care provider to the animals. However, the issue at hand isn't a judge of the character or the ability, it's to determine whether or not the site plan is being followed and to resolve the barking noise coming from your business. I hope very much that we can find a solution that's agreeable for everyone. On behalf of the neighbors from Westwoods Road, Jeffries Way, Drolla Lane, Alfred Road, and beyond, thank you for your time.
Good evening, Phil Pitcock. Good evening, Phil Pitcock, to Westwoods Road on the butter. While the ordinance may not contain a performance standard regarding the specific number of animals kept in the kennel, it is crucial to consider the zoning district that we're discussing here tonight, rural residential. As stated in the ordinance, consistent with the comprehensive plan adopted in 2022, the purpose of this district is to, quote, allow residential development that is compatible with the character and traditional use of rural lands. Given this, it's reasonable to conclude that the staff review committee in 2009 shared my firm belief that any expansion of this commercial operation is in stark opposition to the zoning plan. Allowing the expansion of commercial business in the rural residential zoning district not only contravenes the zoning plan, it undermines the comprehensive plan, which did not enumerate rural residential in either growth or transitional areas. As I've noted in one of my many complaints to the town, which have seemed to fall on deaf ears over the years, whether through the website, to the police, or to Chris, through this noise and the nuisance, I've been unable to conduct my profession as a consultant from home for many of the reasons brought forth here today. Clients asking why I'm outside with the dogs, clients asking why I'm at a kennel, clients asking if I can call them back when I'm somewhere where I can do work. And again, this is from inside my home. This barking, which begins at 6:45 a.m. and can be heard in our bedroom, interferes with our possession and use of our property and deprives us the safe and quiet enjoyment of our home. You've been presented substantial evidence tonight regarding the nature of this nuisance. You've seen environmental noise monitoring reports showing a 14-hour window of 65 to 75 decibels. That's the same noise as standing 10 feet away from a city bus. And I know folks in the back here are going to chuckle and laugh and say, well, that's what dogs do and that's how dogs are. But there's one thing in common with everybody that's going to come up here and give their support in regards to that. They don't live next to this and they don't go home to it. They drop their dog off, they're gone for the day, they pick it up, and that's it. They don't deal with the day in, day out, 14-hour a day, 65 to 75 decibel reading at my property line, 24/7, 365. Now, beyond that, I'd like to get to the heart of the zoning ordinance. So, the town zoning ordinances, if you go to Article 1, Section 2A, were enacted to promote and conserve the health, safety, convenience, and welfare of the town residents. It's no coincidence that ordinances pertaining to noise are viewed by the Supreme Judicial Court of Maine as being safety ordinances at heart. In fact, the court has held that violation of noise ordinances may be viewed as evidence of negligence. The noise generated by the Red Barn Inn is no minor concern. I'll quote directly from the Maine Technical Assistance Bulletin, which likely assisted in guiding the drafting of the town's very own noise ordinance. Quote, noise can also negatively impact concentration, communication, and sleep, creating annoying and sometimes even hazardous conditions. These factors are important in setting noise standards for the community. It is also important to protect neighborhoods so that residents can communicate and enjoy their property. Residential areas should be protected from noise so that residents are able to obtain uninterrupted sleep. Interrupted sleep can result in serious health impacts and also affect personal safety at home and at work. Another consideration for municipal officials is property values. Neighborhoods subject to noise disturbance will generally have lower values. These concerns noted in the Maine Technical Advisory Bulletin are concerns that my wife and I share and believe that you should too. As we've noted, and as our neighbors have noted, we're trapped in our own home. We're unable to enjoy our yard, we're unable to have dinner outside, unable to have a coffee on the deck and have a conversation because again, 65 to 75 decibels from right across the way is equivalent to trying to have a conversation over a city bus at 10 feet. That's what we're discussing here today. Given that the Red Barn Inn has ongoingly and flagrantly disregarded existing zoning restrictions and safety statutes in the form of noise ordinances, this last-minute inclusion of a non-engineered sound solution should be rejected by the Site Planning Review Board within the confines and purview of a minor site plan review. Regarding this request, I strongly urge the Site Plan Review Board to look to the comprehensive plan for specific guidance in this obviously emotionally charged issue and reject this request for failure to meet requirements enumerated in Article 11, Section 8 of the zoning ordinances, both subsections B, referring the open space plan, and subpart 2 buffers. I beg you, please, protect our ability to enjoy our homes, protect our home's values, protect our sleep, protect our sanity. I'm one of many people that's going to come up before you tonight who's been directly affected. And you'll hear from many folks that are not affected by this. And again, I second what Laura said right before me. This isn't about shutting down businesses. My wife and I are dog owners. It's not about shutting down a business. It's about ensuring that a business operates within the zoning ordinances and restrictions that you as a town have set out as performance standards. Those standards have been disregarded for years, and for the applicant to now come in and say, well, it's fine, I haven't paid any attention to any of the standards or the rules but we will promise, wink, wink, as a resident, it beggars belief. So again, thank you for your time, and I urge you to reject this proposal.
Good evening. My name is Xander Fogg, and I live with my husband Philip at 2 Westbridge Road. We are the closest bordering Red Barn Inn's property. Since the spring of 2023, the barking and howling noise from the Red Barn Inn has worsened and become an unavoidable disruption in our lives. As you heard from us and our neighbors in the warmer months, the simple act of sitting outside on our deck to enjoy a cup of coffee, eat dinner, or read a book has been made miserable by the barking noise coming from the dogs at the kennel. Often, we are driven inside to escape the noise, but even once inside, it is completely unavoidable. We can't watch TV in our living room with the windows open in the summer because we literally can't hear the TV over the sound of the dogs barking. Additionally, I also work from home full time, and coworkers can hear the dogs when I'm on calls, which is distracting and has impacts as to how I'm viewed professionally. To say that the barking noise coming from the Red Barn Inn has impacted our quality of life is an understatement. One of the main reasons why we bought our home here and chose Kennebunk as a community is because we love to enjoy the outdoors and want to spend as much time as possible outside in our own space. We're now unable to enjoy our own property due to the nuisance created by the Red Barn Inn. I'm frustrated and disappointed that the town has yet to act after numerous noise complaints, police reports, and knowing that the inn has been operating outside of the compliance with the original 2009 site plan. We are putting our faith in you, the Site Plan Review Board, as our only hope in resolving this issue. While I believe that the Red Barn Inn should be limited to the originally agreed upon 15 dogs inside at all times, I'm also here to ask you to please consider the noise of any size facility, and please put measures in place to effectively enforce those requirements on the business to keep the dogs inside and with sound dampening measures in place. Our quality of life and our future as Kennebunk residents depends on it. Thank you for your time.
Good evening. My name is Jeff Ferris. My wife Caroline on Jeffrey's Way. We live about 1,000 feet from the Red Barn Inn property, and we can clearly hear many dogs barking at various times of the day, all year long. We've lived there for 24 years, and the noise level from the Red Barn Inn has risen dramatically in the past couple of years. This noise is a direct result of the increase in the number of dogs being kept there and the unapproved growth of the facility capacity in recent years. The original agreement between the town and the Red Barn Inn when they opened in 2009 was that the dog count would be capped at 15. For many years, the Red Barn Inn honored that, and we could not hear any barking. Now that the facility, without proper zoning and site plan approvals, is taking upwards of 80, 90 dogs at a time, the noise has become an issue for the entire neighborhood, impacting quality of life, especially those living directly adjacent to it, and many in the neighborhood are dog owners themselves. Naturally, everyone is also concerned about the potential negative impact on property values. We have a few concerns to touch on regarding the application for growth and the fence work, and urge the board to consider these. Jeff touched on some of this better than I will. The current documentation is not clear about the proposed existing chain link fence alterations to provide sound deadening. I didn't see a height indicated on the documents. Maybe I missed it. I did look at the provided site plan and the submitted product cut. There's no drawings on or any details nor any projected sound deadening projections versus the current state. There does not appear to be any type of noise or sound analysis study in the application documents. How does the applicant know that the proposed acoustic block product will work in their unique configuration, as Jeff touched on, to eliminate the noise? Was the product manufacturer consulted, or did they perform an analysis? This is akin to a site photometric plan for lighting, but for noise levels, same type of thing. Also of concern, and not related to the noise level, and this was discussed, I believe, in the January meeting as part of the initial earlier site plan reviews. And I think the requirement may have been waived, but it was just a closer analysis of the wastewater treatment systems there. And I think that in two of the
submitted documents. One of the wastewater subsurface disposal system applications was dated 2009. The other was dated 2012. So these are not connected to the noise level, but they are related to the number of dogs allowed. So as the waste, we have a concern about the waste management process. Is there any type of runoff? And to see that the waste gets packaged and tossed away, but are there, is there a need to look at that again? We live, the runoff from that property runs northerly into Emerson's property and our property and into Westwoods and the rest of Jeffrey's Way. That's the surface flow and the subsurface flow, those waterways in that area. So I would just request that take a second look be taken at that. And most of the houses in the area are on wells also, so that's a concern. One other concern, finally, is the concern of precedent. Not only has this business grown without the required town approvals in recent years, it has done so in conflict and in violation with the original agreements set forth in the 2009 agreement. The current owner should have performed better due diligence prior to purchasing. To make an analogy or two, if this were a gas station and the underground tanks were leaking, the current owner would be responsible for remediating. Only we are talking about noise pollution in this case. Or would the zoning and site plan boards allow a restaurant to increase the seating capacity from 15 to 90 seats without meeting all the necessary approval process requirements? If this business is allowed to continue without the noise issue resolved, what message does this send to other neighborhoods in the town where a nearby commercial or business could have negative ramifications if that commercial use decided to simply violate environmental and zoning regulations without the proper approval process? I think, like many of the neighbors, we are not opposed to the business being there. We agree with Laura's statement, a fine business, and we don't want to oppose having it there. We are opposed to the noise that it generates and other negative environmental impacts it may have. We would urge the board to consider making any final decisions conditional upon the applicant meeting all of the town and state requirements as necessary, as well as noise mitigation to the satisfaction of the neighborhood, just like the original owner agreed to. Respectfully, Jeff and Caroline Ferris. And for the record, we are in full agreement and support the statements of the previous speakers, especially Scott Ellis and Jeff McCorkle.
I may be the first speaker in contradiction to what we've heard so far, but my name's Joe Rafferty. I live on 49 Middle Road in Kennebunk. My wife Norma and I have a dog, Howard, and we are customers at the Red Barn. And I realize that, you know, this is a very difficult situation, and I sympathize honestly with both sides. So it's kind of where do you stand, and it's hard to define. But I do know that when I called the town hall to ask about dogs and licensing, I just was trying to get an idea of how many dogs there are in Kennebunk. But there are between, no exact number, there were between 1,500 and 2,000 dogs registered in the town. If you go online and look, the Red Barn is the only kennel in the community. So it is certainly a needed business. And I will make a couple of points. I know that there's been a lot of conversation, and a lot of conversation goes back to 2009. The current owner has only owned the property for 1 year. And I think she is here and hoping that she can work with you folks in an effort to move forward. And some folks have spoke about sound and so forth, but one of the people doing it specifically said, I'm not a sound engineer, but yet stated that the proposed soundproof or sounding wall that she is looking at purchasing won't work. I don't know how we know that. Maybe there can be more research done and more evidence to prove that it will. But I do know that the need is there. noise of any kind is frustrating. But I know the need is there, and I think that you folks, I hope that you consider dog owners, and as dog owners, and I think a couple of people that spoke that lived in that neighborhood own dogs. I think it's unrealistic to expect or keep a dog indoors all day long. 14-hour day inside doesn't seem realistic, and I doubt that they do that at home. And I would not be a customer of the Red Barn if they did that to my dog. Dogs need to be out. I kind of think it's, I won't equate it, but in any case, dogs do need to get out. I hope that we can reach a resolution that's acceptable. Please know that she is the first licensed owner. She's only been there for 1 year. Her business is licensed, and I believe she's making a legitimate effort to try to rectify things and be a good business owner to the community and a good neighbor to the neighborhood. And I know it's frustrating, but thank you very much.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I got one right there. Come right up.
Hi there, my name is Robin Hewitt-Bibber, and I don't actually have anything prepared because I wasn't sure that I was going to speak tonight. I've lived in this community for, well, I moved here when I was 6 months old, so I'm not born and raised, but I was raised. And since I'm coming up on my 58th birthday, you all can do the math. I have great sympathy for the people who live in the Westwoods development. And I think that a lot of this is, my history with this property goes back 40 years when I rode horses in the land that is Drala and Westwood. So it's always been rural, it's always been. The problem to me, a lot of it seems to be that we're in this crossroads in our community where rural and residential have met because of the growth of this community. And growth is not bad. But growth is a problem when it impedes on businesses that have been there for a long time. Our family has used the Red Barn for 10 years with multiple different dogs. We go back to the original owners. And despite what Westwoods is saying about the dogs always being inside, I actually have pictures. If I had known that we could do presentations with pictures, I would have brought them. I have pictures of my dogs outside in that enclosed area that they say wasn't there. It was there. Our dog, current dog, Ruby May, is a happy participant, and she looks forward to going every day. And as a dog owner who also has to work, because in order to live in a community like this, you have to work, she enjoys her play dates. The other thing that I think needs to be clarified is in the lengthy presentation that Westwoods was giving, they talked about housing 80 dogs. They're not housing 80 dogs. This is really kind of two different things. They have the dogs that board there, and then they have the dogs that come and are outside playing as a play group. That's not housing. That's like saying children that go to daycare are housed at daycare. They're not housed at daycare. They're playing and being taken care of, which is what we're trying to have our dogs taken care of. There was talk about mental health. I think we all know, for us who have dogs, we understand the importance of dogs to our mental health and our pets to our mental health. If you're a pet owner, you understand what that animal does for you and what it gives to you every day. So these animals for my mental health, my dog for my mental health is really important. And I'm assuming that the other owners feel the same. I don't envy you guys. It's a rough job that you have. But to me, this issue is really clear. The Red Barn Inn meets the zoning ordinance. It meets the zoning requirements, which do not limit the amount of dogs that can be in this kind of facility. Why the site plan review originally did this, or the staff review originally did it, I don't know. Nobody knows, really. Other than having the Lawrences come in and say, nobody really knows. But I would also say the Lawrences had well more than 15 dogs when I was boarding my dog 10 years ago. So, but if it meets the zoning, then a business should be allowed to continue to provide its services. Westwood says they don't want to shut the daycare down, but of course they do, because if they can't manage a business with 15 dogs, and it takes 80 dogs and the number of dogs that they have to meet the business, then of course the business is going to go out of business. If that is just simple math. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Stephanie Glidden, and I am not a resident of Kennebunk. I am, however, a resident of Biddeford, and this is the closest dog boarding facility and daycare. I myself have 3 dogs. I absolutely know it is annoying to have dogs that are barking. I have 3. One of them is a hound, and one of them is a small yippy dog. I get it. Not all of them go to Red Barn Inn. It is annoying. But there's a few things that have been said that have been really frustrating for me to hear as a customer and as someone who has worked in the animal field for about 15 years now. I've worked in zoological field, I've worked in veterinary field, and when I was just starting out as, a young adult, if you could even call 17, 18 a young adult, I was working in dog daycares. They're not housed outside, and I know that a couple of people have already said this. They're not housed outside 24/7. Dogs do not bark 24/7. I have brought my dogs to other kennels outside of the ones that I personally have worked at. I have had dogs that come back in bad condition and I've never been able to return because I didn't trust that kennel anymore. I've had dogs that come back and they are hoarse from barking. And I've never brought my dog back because I know that that was not a good condition. I've been coming to Red Barn Inn for 7 years. Started with she was 6 weeks old. I didn't bring her quite at that young, but I got a 6-week-old, very sickly puppy. I needed to socialize her, and Red Barn Inn helped me at that time 7 years ago, and I have trusted them since. My dogs have never come back in deplorable conditions. They have never come back hoarse. And I know one of my dogs, he likes to bark. He's a barker, and you do need to tell him to stop. He will stop, but you do need to tell him. I trust Red Barn, and I think that a lot of what's been said today is going back to 2009. It is going back to 3 owners past, and it is not considering the fact, I think the woman right before the last one, she mentioned that Audra has been the first person to have a kennel license. She's making changes. She is proposing changes already. And if we don't trust to put those changes in, somebody asked, how do we know it's going to work? Well, we don't 100% know it's going to work. But I can tell you a couple of things. Somebody said 29 kennels that house their dogs all indoors. I don't believe a single one of them house their dogs 24/7 indoors. It would be a hygienic nightmare. I have a senior dog. I come home almost daily to pick it up. It would be a hygienic nightmare to house dogs inside 24/7. Is the noise annoying? Absolutely. And I feel really bad for some of these people who live right next door. It can get loud. But to say that it's 24/7, or even from 6:30 a.m. or 6 a.m. till 8:30 p.m., I've worked at dog daycares for a total of 4 years. I worked in veterinary hospitals for a total of 5 years after that. They don't bark 24/7. The decibel levels cannot possibly be at that height all that time. Was there a day that they've been amped up? Full moon. Everybody knows full moon. It is crazy on full moons. There may be some times that, yes, it could get really loud, but I absolutely cannot believe that the dogs are barking 24/7. I think Audra has done a great job. She's proposing changes. If we don't let those changes happen, how will we ever know if it works? we've got to put some faith into what the things that she's researched. The fence, like you said, they're not a sound engineer. I'm not a sound engineer. I'm definitely not smart enough. I can only speak to my own experiences working with animals. But if we don't try, we'll never know if it's going to work. Can we revisit? Can we do a conditional? Can we work on what we've got on the table right now, see what needs to be adjusted, and maybe adjust later on again? Just things to consider as a pet owner who has been there for many years. Thank you.
Alexi Cutting of Day Street, Kennebunk. I am an employee since November of 2021 at the Red Barn Inn, so I started working for Chuck. I worked for Chris, and now I have been working for Audra for the past year. During this time, in the past year is when the complaints have started. Other than that, I didn't hear from Chuck that there were neighbors complaining. I didn't hear from his girlfriend, Andrea, who took really good care of the establishment at that time. I didn't hear any information from her, who she seemed to care a lot about the community and things like that. There weren't any noise complaints with Chris. And also the number of dogs have not changed in that number of years. When I arrived with Chuck, there were the same number. We do not have more dogs now than we did then. We have the same number or less because unfortunately they have an expiration date. Some dogs have expired, but we have the same number. They don't bark all hours of the day because we don't allow it. We are very considerate of the neighbors during the day. We try to control the barking. We keep it to a minimum as much as we can. We do that by visiting each dog in the yard, making our rounds, saying, "Be quiet, please," touching them gently on the back, redirecting them, saying, "Hey, let's go over this way," show them something more exciting. I don't think that people have realized the work that Audra has put in yet, and they're not being patient enough to wait for the work that she's going to put in. She has a lot of creative ideas. She takes creative ideas from her employees and listens to her employees. I've worked in dog daycares for 5+ years. I have been in pet care business since I was 14 years old. My mom was an ACO for 20 years. So I know my dogs, I know my stuff, and I know that Audra is absolutely willing to work with the neighbors and do what's best for the dogs, the people, the community, and her staff. And I know that we provide an essential service. I've been working there for 3 years. This is how I support my 14-year-old son. I don't receive food stamps. I don't receive assistance. I feed my son based off the paycheck that I make from the Red Barn Inn every week. He is growing. He's a teenager. I need to feed him. He plays baseball. He plays sports. He's a member of the community. We moved from Naples, Maine to Kennebunk because it is an affluent community where I believe that the school system would have been better than where we were. Now, in order to keep him in the system and to keep living where I would like for my son to grow up, I need a paycheck. I like having my paycheck from the Red Barn Inn. I love all of the dogs, every single one. There is not one that I would ever turn away from. There is not one that I would not give a hug. And I love all the staff, and I love the changes that Audra has brought to the establishment. I just think that patience is key in this issue. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. My name is Rachel. I want to apologize in advance if my remarks aren't polished. I had no plan to come and speak tonight. I wanted to say that I moved to this area less than 2 months ago, and I moved here only because of the Red Barn Inn. I was recruited here because there's a physician shortage in the area, and I was told that this area of Maine really needs doctors. And if this if this business didn't exist, I would 100% have to move because it's the only kennel here. And it's the only kennel that had any openings for several towns around Kennebunk. So I wanted to just emphasize how much this community needs the Red Barn Inn. I also wanted to mention that my dog Artie, who's a 3-year-old, he turned 3 today, is a talker. He barks nonstop. And after 2 days at the Red Barn Inn, Audra told me that he could not continue coming unless I agreed to put a bar collar on him. So with all due respect to the people who are really being annoyed by all the noise, I know as a customer that Audra is not allowing dogs to be barking incessantly all the time anymore. Whatever might have been happening before, it hurt me because I like that my dog makes noise. I feel like it's a way for him to communicate. But she said he can't come without a bar collar, and he's been wearing a bar collar every day for the last 2 months because of it. I'm concerned that some of the suggestions that were made for what Audra should do, like building a whole enclosure, that would be financially unfeasible for a new business owner. And I just want to encourage you and urge you, please, to consider the needs of the entire Kennebunk community, to grow and have more doctors here and grow and be able to accommodate more people moving in, and creating the services that need to happen as the community develops, including having appropriate dog care. I'm sorry?
What is the spelling of your last name?
Z like zebra, I-N-N-S like Sam.
Thank you.
I am prepared to speak, because I'm not a good public speaker, but I will have to be speaking on other things later. My name is Stephanie Lauer, and I'm a 22-year resident at 48 Fort Road in Kennebunk as an adult. I was also born and lived at the same residence as a child in the 70s and 80s. I'm here tonight in support of the Red Barn Inn. We've been going there since 2011, when our now deceased lab mix, Dominic, was a puppy, and Linda Lawrence was running it. Since then, we've continued our patronage through the next 3 dogs with our bulldog Edgar, through the next 3 owners. Not once was either of our dogs indifferent about going there. In fact, when our Raiders leash comes out in the morning, he knows he's on his way to daycare and starts dancing and prancing with excitement. Edgar does just as Dominic used to do and gets excited during the 15-minute car ride out to West K. I have never needed to coax them out of the truck. Edgar's wiggle butt darts straight for the entrance each morning after a quick sniff and pee on the statues. While Edgar has, through 3 owners, eventually been given the title of a keep separate dog, he is still so incredibly excited to go and is absolutely exhausted when he comes home. However, even with this moniker, Edgar gets treated like a prince that he is, and it is such a welcoming environment during drop-off and pickup that whoever is manning the desk always takes the time to greet him and me and give him his favorite yummy treats before heading home. I don't understand why Audra is getting all the flack for this business now that she is the new owner, and this issue was not brought up while the other 2 owners had it. I since know that it has. Since they were the ones who essentially grew the business during their tenure. But I'm quite certain that it's being run with the utmost professionalism and care to all the dogs and families that use their service. Not only does she provide such a service to the local community, but she also provides a service to all the tourists that come and spend their dollars in many of our area businesses. In the summer, I see a lot of out-of-state plates dropping off for the day or even for an extended sleepover while they spend their time and money in our town. Many tourists who want to travel but do not want to leave their animals at home look specifically for such amenities close to where they're traveling so that they can bring their beloved companions with them on vacation. I fear that closing her doors will discourage many tourists from vacationing here, in turn dropping revenue at many local businesses as well. If she is getting noise complaints from neighbors now, 13 plus years after the dogs first started going there. I would like to know if some of these people are new neighbors. I now know some of you are not. After the business was already there. Because I am annoyed that people are moving in from out of state, not the doctor that just spoke, thank you, we need to. Not only increasing our cost of housing here, and therefore prohibiting the locals from living in their own town and state. If we didn't buy the house for my father, we wouldn't be living here right now, because he gave us a nice deal. Anyway, people move here wanting to live life like we do, but then they eventually change it to the way of life from the location which they escaped. It's very frustrating. In any case, for any new residents who bought homes and or land after the Red Barn was already an established service, they really don't have the right to complain because they knew it was a thriving doggy daycare when they moved in. If they did not, neither they nor their realtor did their due diligence. Please allow Audra Simpson and the Red Barn Inn to remain open and continue business as usual for my sake as well as the town's. Now I'm going to try to speak without my notes. So as I was listening to all the neighbors, I do feel for them, and they were very persuasive, and I completely understand. I don't have a barker. I don't think he barks much. He doesn't bark at home, I can tell you, he sleeps all day. But, you know, they do make bark silencing devices, and I was looking up on my phone to try to see how that would incorporate, but when they go off, only dogs can hear them. But the problem is with the barking dogs hearing them, even the non-barking dogs can hear them, and so then it might irritate them a little bit too, and it just might cause more stress. Build a building, like the physician said, it's not feasible as a brand new owner to try to tell her after she spent a lot of money on that location to now she has to come up with a lot more money to build an enclosure. I also am curious, I don't know when the zoning changed out there. I don't know, is it rural residential? Do you know when did that change from, was it agricultural or just rural? I don't know. I'm just curious.
Farm enforced? Yeah, it was after 93.
And when? In the 80s?
93.
Oh, 93? Like when Westwoods went in and stuff?
They just changed the name of it.
Yeah, exactly.
What was it before?
Farm and Forest.
Okay. I don't agree with any of the people who've been harassing the neighbors. That's just uncalled for. I don't know why they were doing that. I was appalled when I heard that. I haven't been, so I apologize for them. As far as the noise goes, I live on Port Road between the two cemeteries, and I know what noise is. Constant road noise in the summer, especially with motorcycles. As soon as they see that it's a nice straightaway at the top of the hill, they're so I do know how horrible noise can be in the summertime because we have all of our windows up, and I understand that. But it is a business that does help our community because of the service that they give to the tourists and stuff. When we had our first dog, when we first moved back, we went to another one that's semi-local, and when we picked him up, we never brought him back there again because it was just, he was dehydrated because they said he kept knocking his water over. Well, then you keep filling up water, and he was so hoarse from all of his barking, and he wasn't a barker either. But all of our dogs, when they've gone to Red Barn Inn, have not had this effect, and they are treated like family there. So I hope that you don't, she's not the one that grew it. So for her to now all of a sudden having to be dealing with this is just terrible, but I don't know. Okay, that's all.
Hi there. My name is Tyler Dunn. I live on High Street in Kennebunk.
I've been a dog trainer for the past 2 years professionally, and about a year before that as an apprentice. Dog barking is, as much as I do understand, because I work at a mostly indoor facility, I do understand that barking can get annoying, but it is one of the very few forms of communication that dogs actually have with each other and with us. The dog barking is a completely natural behavior that happens to every dog. Every dog will bark, even if it's not repeated. The facility I work at, I could pull up many videos here now of just the incessant barking that goes on the entire time. But the owners, every time we talk to them about it, it's just at the facility. It's the level of stimulation inside of that environment that causes dogs to bark that much. I just wanted to give a little bit of extra insight. So, thank you.
Good evening. Can you hear me? My name is Alan Q. I actually live in Biddeford right now. I've lived in Kennebunkport for about 14 years, and recently, well, actually 10 years ago, moved up to Biddeford. Having lost a dog about 5 years ago and being dogless for 5 years, I decided it was time to get another dog. So what do when you get another dog? You go get another dog, and you use the beg for forgiveness syndrome to go home with it. My wife thinks I'm nuts at my age, after 8 decades of living and having dogs and so forth. And she said, "What are you, nuts? Well, what are you going to do with the dog?" Well, we'll just love the dog. We'll have a great time. It'll improve our lives. We'll be healthier. We'll live longer. We'll have a great time. And she said, "Oh, God, I don't know." Now, this woman works 8 to 10 hours a day herself, actually, at a inn up in Cape Elizabeth, where they have a dog program. They actually bring dogs in from the Portland, I guess it's the Portland Rescue Service, and they bring them into the front desk of the inn. This is the inn by the sea, by the way. And guests arrive at the inn, and sometimes even before they check in, they will adopt that dog that's sitting behind the desk. She had, I think, 150 dogs so far since the program's been instigated. Excuse me. And so she really loves dogs. We have this dog's 75 pounds. The dog can actually pull me across the street anytime it wants to. So I wear really good tread sneakers. But on occasion, she said, "Wouldn't it be nice to go away?" And last Thanksgiving, family up in New Hampshire said, "You've got to come up here and eat turkey." We said, "Fine." She said, "What are you going to do with the dog?" I said, "I'll find somebody to take care of the dog." And it wasn't easy. I went as far up to Scarborough and called a number of places and so forth, and finally called the Red Barn Inn and said, "Can you help me out?" And they said, "Sure, we'll give it a try." So we went out there, saved the weekend, and so far, since I've had the dog, which came to me in August, we've only had one need for the Red Barn Inn. But I gave them my dog. It was handed back to me, groomed, nails trimmed. She looked terrific. Smelled better, too. Dogs are a necessary part of our lives, and they're as necessary as our relatives, our family, our children, our adults, our grandparents, our associates, and so forth. And we do spend a lot of time taking care of one another, do we not? We take care of babies, we put them in day schools, high schools, colleges. Our elders go into retirement homes. I've been doing a little research recently on that myself. But the point is that sometimes the love and the need for this relationship is so intense that when the family leaves the home, we sometimes need something else. So what do? We get a dog. And a dog is really critical. It's critical to our health, and if it's a physician in the house, they'd probably tell you how much longer you live if you have a dog. Unfortunately, our dogs don't live as long as we'd like them to sometimes. But my point here is that I'm sorry, I need some water here, or some drink or something. Anyway, our dogs are so critical that the community should keep this in mind. The community provides policemen, fire service, school services, all sorts of things to benefit its community, does it not? They pay for it, they do whatever it needs to fund the systems and so forth. And the Red Barn was the closest that I could find from Biddeford, which is what, 7-8 miles away, to get my dog a place to live. And I think this is one of the important things here that has to be considered. And I understand noise in a neighborhood, because there's often noise in all of our neighborhoods, whether there's somebody's building a house next door, or there is an unruly dog, or whatever it might be. So I understand that part of it, but I think there has to be a meeting ground in between the noise, the people affected by the noise, and the Red Barn in itself that could be, come to a conclusion. And from what I understand, Audrey is doing what she can to get to that point. And so I would certainly hope, from my viewpoint, that everything would be done, everything would be done that would help facilitate the meeting of the minds to make this thing continue to work, so that we'll all have some place to take our dogs when necessary for those special occasions or even a vacation out of town. Just out of curiosity, I hit my decibel letter, my decibel thing on the phone in here, and some of the sounds in here were reaching 50, 55 decibels. So I don't know how that relates to dog noise, but anyway, thanks very much for listening. I'm sorry.
Good evening. My name is Jeff Dunzik. I'm an attorney representing the Westwoods Homeowners Association. And the board's heard a lot of factual evidence and testimony on both sides, and I'm not going to get into that. I did want to touch briefly on the board's authority to consider the noise issue and impose appropriate conditions if it gets to that point. It's been suggested that the board has no such authority. In part because the town has a separate noise ordinance and because noise is not specified in the performance standards. We do disagree with that. First of all, the existence of a noise ordinance does not preclude this board from considering noise as part of its site plan review. And I think we look to Article 11, Section 8. Those are expressly stated to be minimum requirements, not the extent of the scope of your review. And it expressly provides the board with the authority to impose conditions of approval if it feels that those conditions are necessary in order for the application to meet those standards. And we look specifically again at Article 11, Section 8, Subsection 2, which concerns buffering. A non-residential project is required to have effective buffering between it and adjoining residential properties. And I think that's where we get to this issue, because buffering can apply to noise as well as visual. The Kennebunk ordinance does not distinguish those two parts of what falls in the definition of a buffer. And so hopefully by the fact that the board has heard substantial testimony about noise, the board is considering that as part of its deliberation on this application. Which means that the board can impose whatever conditions concerning noise mitigation that it finds are appropriate or necessary. To repeat what many of the property owners have already testified to, the goal here is not to drive a business out. The goal is to find that place where the noise that is naturally generated by barking dogs is mitigated to the point where it's not an issue for the neighboring residential property owners. It's a separate issue entirely why neither the code enforcement office or the police department are very eager about even investigating, let alone enforcing the noise ordinance or the dog ordinance. That's a discussion for another day. My conclusion here is just to reemphasize that it's our belief that this board does have full authority to deal with this issue and impose conditions as appropriate. Thank you.
How's it going? My name is Luke Bibber. Been using Red Barn for about 5 years now. And I got my dog because I work a very stressful career. See stuff that you don't want to talk about, but I also work long hours. Got a dog because it's a way of freeing stress that you see on the daily business. And my girlfriend, who's working now, also a long hour in the healthcare business, has a dog. So we have two that go to Red Barn. When they go to Red Barn, they are treated like family to them, the staff. I get text messages when we drop them off from the staff giving us updates. Actually, the slideshow actually showed my dog on it, which that's an honor, I guess. But the photo was misleading. It was a photo of him that looked like he was barking. He probably was. His dogs bark. It's a fact. Dogs bark. But the gentleman came up here and gave you facts that he thinks he knows what he's talking about. What are we doing is, he admitted that he's not a sound engineer, but he gave you guys facts that made it look like he was. I would ask you guys not to actually listen to that, because he doesn't know what he's talking about. I'm asking the town to support the Red Barn. People like me that live nearby, because I can't afford to live in Kennebunk, we're blue-collar workers. We need this in town. I passed 3 other dog parks, or dog daycares. All of them have outside kennel spaces. Another misleading fact in his slideshow he dropped off or gave you guys. The entire slideshow was misleading. And I'm sorry that they're having to deal with this, but blaming the current owners for something that happened 15 years ago, it's not very business friendly, is it? There's a blue sign on Fletcher Street when they get off the highway. I passed it the other day. It says certified business friendly. Around the DOT garage, I think it is. We should be supporting the business, not tearing it apart. I hope the town thinks about this. Let's make this town better. We need these kind of businesses in town in order to survive, especially for people who work hard for a living. I don't have the luxury to work from home. I wish I did. I'd be around my dogs every day. It's a blessing to be around my dogs every day. But I have to go to work 24-hour shifts. My girlfriend works 12-hour shifts. It's not fair to the dogs to be left inside, like someone suggested, for 12 to 14 hours. It's not fair. It's not right. They're outside playing. They have jackets in the wintertime. They're outside playing. They're jumping on those things because they like to play around with other dogs. I like looking at the photos they post online because my dogs are playing with other dogs. That's what I send them to daycare for. And again, I'm asking the town, please support the Red Barn. It is a crucial thing for the town and for our area. Thank you.
Well, just want to clarify a few things because there were comments on my presentation. You're right, I'm not a sound engineer. I did consult with the firm, the Kusaba company, just due diligence as a neighbor, to just have a conference call with them to discuss the best means and methods to to install the product that they're talking about, and that is what I presented you today. You're right, not a sound engineer, but what we showed you, it didn't make it up. It's facts. Nothing was misleading. The barking is seriously affecting our life, our mental health, our really our mental health. It's affecting my mental health. It's affecting other people's mental health. Support local business, support female business. They've never tried to shut the Red Barn down, and we have been complaining for multiple years through multiple owners, whether people have been told that or not. And we have been complaining to the town for over 2 years formally, which that can be looked up. Thank you.
My name's Jonah. I'm a little bit younger than a lot of people here, but I just thought I'd put my 2 cents in that a lot of people think that we want to shut down the Red Barn Inn when this is a sound problem. And when she first came up, she brought up that sound wouldn't stop the expansion, but this is what all the presentations, this is what everyone's talking about. It's the sound. It's not the expansion, it's the sound. And what the expansion brings is more sound. I think, as people have said, Kennebunk needs a dog kennel. Expanding it would be a good thing. That comes with sound, and that's the problem. So if we can prove that the sound panels are going to work, then they can present that to you. But so far it hasn't been presented. It's a sound problem. That's what needs to be focused on. And then we can go further on expanding and making it better for the community so more and more dogs can come in without disturbing the existing neighbors. Thank you.
Anybody else want to comment? Then I'll close the. I'm going to close the public comment portion, and then you can come up and respond. Or I can leave it open in case somebody wants to add.
Keep it open.
Okay. Yeah,
My suggestion would be to keep it open until the board is satisfied that it has absolutely no additional information it needs to hear from members of the public, and then it's appropriate to close that.
Okay.
At that point.
All right.
Did you close it? Is it closed right now?
No, we're going to keep it open for a little longer because the attorney for the Red Barn Inn wants to speak. And if anybody wants to speak after that, you can. Well, you're up.
No, she can go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm Lori Ellis, and I'm a community member and a longtime employee of RSU 21. I am a band director. This is very hard for me to speak tonight because I look out in the audience and I have parents of students out there. I have friends in the community that use the Red Barn Inn. I've also lived at Westwoods Road for 20 plus years, way before the kennel was even in existence. As I said, I'm a band director. I know what noise is. I live it. I work it. It's controlled noise. It's controlled music, actually. It's controlled sound. You can stop them. You can start them. You can harmonize them. You can't do that with 80 dogs outside in a pen, running around and playing. I get that dogs need to play. We all need to play. But we are professionals in this community as well. We are living in a neighborhood full of professionals, medical people that need their rest. Some of them work overnight and they come home and they sleep during the day, or they try to sleep during the day. That's not possible when the dogs awake the neighbors at 6 o'clock in the morning or at 6:30 and they cannot get a good restful night's sleep. I implore you to look at, before we make any decisions, that you contract with a sound engineer, that you find out whether this is going to work. Why would somebody waste their money on something that's not going to work and we're going to have problems later on that this is not a resolved issue. I don't know that you can make a decision this evening without those facts. None of us in here, I believe, maybe there are somebody out here that is a sound engineer. I'm not a sound engineer, but I deal with sound engineering in my professional life, and I have for 36 years. So please consider the mental well-being of all the neighbors. And I get that the dogs provide comfort, but when we can't have comfort in our own homes and enjoy our neighborhoods and our neighbors and our own families, that's an issue in this community. And we've been here for a while. So when we hear on Facebook, or when we read on Facebook or social media that we should have made decisions and we should have been well informed before we bought here, some of us existed here prior to the Red Barn Inn original owners. So with all due respect, please stop driving up our neighborhood, screaming out windows. Please stop posting that we want to shut down the Red Barn Inn. We want to live in peace and quiet. Thank you.
So we've been here for 2 hours now, and a lot of the conversation has been about noise, which I believe was one ground rule that was set going into this hearing, was that the board doesn't have authority over noise. Who does have authority over noise in this town is the police department, through enforcing the noise standard that is in a different ordinance that this board doesn't apply and enforce. The reason that this application is in front of this board is not because the town fathers have determined that this is the board to solve all the problems, and thank goodness for that, I think, because this is a complicated issue, and it is not an issue for this board to legislate, and it is not an issue for this board to apply, because you are bound by the site plan review ordinance and the very specific standards that are in place under that ordinance. And your consultant, Mr. Feldman, has said in the memo that the issue of noise is not within your purview, and it's right in the memo that that's the case. Now, buffering is in your purview, and the attorney for Westwood indicated that buffering also means noise. And if you look at the language of the ordinance, actually, I think that buffering in this case, under your site plan review standards, is designed about visual screening. It interchangeably uses the term screening with buffering. And the screening standards that are in place there under the ordinance, which is basically a stand of pine trees, would never be effective in any event to prevent noise from going from a commercial property to an abutting residential property. So it's indicative of the fact that noise is not the concern there, it's screening. But in any event, the kennel use has been in place all of this time. The original approval simply required that the existing buffering not be reduced. It's never been reduced. And there is actually quite a lot of buffering between the complaining neighborhood and the commercial use here. Hundreds of feet, I believe, if you were to measure it out on the map. And so, in terms of the standard that you are allowed to apply, even if it does extend to noise, it's met. There is an area between the Red Barn and the immediately abutting residential property along the road, and that doesn't probably have the width of screening that if this were a new use, it might be required to provide. But we also don't have any complaints from that neighbor that you all have heard or that we have heard about visual, being able to see the property, or noise for that matter. There was a good deal of misstatement made about whether the 2009 approval included any exterior play areas. I don't know, maybe if Mr. Feldman could pull up this particular image from the 2009 approval. I don't want to make you scramble to do so, but
No, the issue's been that for some reason we lost connectivity with the monitor.
so I don't know how maybe I could just show you what I'm talking about as best as I can, and you can refer to your own packages. But these areas here, these are outside the building, and they're each marked play area. And then on this same image, there's garden flowers in front, but then there is also another area that says play area. The other thing to point out about that original plan is at the very, very back of the property, back past that barn that I said isn't used for the kennel, it's an exercise area, meaning exercise area for dogs, and that was the area immediately closest to Westwood. So there very much in 2009 was exterior use in relation to the kennel. We've had people testify that their own dogs used those areas too, that far back. And then, look, without conceding that noise is at all in front of you, we are proposing noise reduction. And I think a very effective solution for noise reduction. I provided the link to the website for the company, and on that link, there are numerous examples of pet-related kennel and animal shelter uses who each of them, at least on the website, promotional materials say that it entirely eliminated the noise complaints. And all of them have pictures. And you will see, just being able to eyeball it, that these are standard 8-foot chain link fences over which this fencing product was overlaid. So if the company is suggesting that the fence be higher, we don't have any of that in the record. And I believe, Audrey, you spoke to the company about the needs, and they said that this would be very effective. So I think that's all I have, unless the board has questions for me. And then I know that Ms. Simpson would like to say a couple of things. Is this going to be my last chance to speak, or if there are questions during deliberations, may I have an answer?
You can jump in just
Okay.
about any time.
Well, I wouldn't do
Keith
that.
has a question.
Yes.
I know this is not really relevant to us, I'm just curious, but what is the time frame on the soundproofing installation?
After approval, it'll get ordered. We're not going to order it before we know whether the business is going to be shut down or not.
I have a question. My concern is that the noise seems to have occurred, or at least the recordings of noise seems to have occurred within the last 3 years. What was the real management change before that? Because I understand it was always more than 15 dogs.
So my name is Audrey Simpson, I'm the owner. Prior to this year, I have no knowledge of what has been done or changed, but I do know that certain people that do live in Westwoods maybe have been living there for around 3 years and been sending videos and everything directly to many people within Chris Osterreiter and Frank Kunkel and stuff like that, because I've been told by that directly. But again, I don't have any bearing on previous owners. And I can tell you that the owner that I purchased it from was not on site at all and let it be completely employee run and was not necessarily putting a handle on that. I am there every day, sometimes 7 days a week, usually 5 or 6 if I can have my way, and constantly on top of everybody, 24/7. And they know that there's issues. All of my employees know that there are issues and that we have problems with the neighbors. So this is why I am constantly on them. And yes, there are certain dogs that I have had to ask the parents to please get bar collars for, because
I don't know what else to do at this point. I'm just really trying to make this all work for all of us. I am trying to reduce my numbers to 85 because I bought a business that was a thriving, productive business in this community. I just want exactly what I purchased to be maintained. I want to keep my employees employed and I want to keep my bills paid. And also the barn, as far as I know, neighbors think that they know exactly the runnings of my business, but they do not. The barn area, as we went through the site view, when we did the site walk, half of that is used for my dogs. The other half is not.
I hear what you're saying, but my concern is the concept of having 80 dogs outside stimulating each other. Is there a possibility of rotating the number of dogs that are outside?
I will tell you that we have had between 80 and 100 dogs since, here and there since I bought the place, and going back to the previous owners, the same thing. It's not a new thing at all. This is all the same standards that have been happening.
I hear the
do
comments,
rotate dogs.
but I hear the comments from the neighbors
Right.
that the noise has increased over the last 3 years.
And again,
And that's
that's all
before
with
you.
whoever's lived there, or when they moved there too.
No, that's fine, but I'm going to take everyone's honesty and say there has been a change in noise over the last 3 years. I'm trying to figure out why 100 dogs 5 years ago was not as noisy as 100 dogs.
I can actually answer that question
3
for you
years
because
ago.
just like every human's not the same, every dog's not the same. So there can be years when you have dogs that just aren't barkers. There can be years when you just have a lot of barkers. They can be talkers. They talk. They bark to talk. They bark to play. And I do rotate the dogs. I've been doing that for probably 9 months now. Anyone that's barking for an excessive period of time, let's say 3 minutes, I have the employees take and put inside and have a break. We have dogs that don't get along with other dogs, so we have to constantly rotate dogs. It's a rotation. Our whole day is gone with rotations and boarding, and everything that we do is to constantly try to worry about the noise, because I'm trying to just get out of this issue. And again, like I did say, I am trying to not lose the business of my current clients, and suggesting and asking if they please can bring a bark collar to try to help reduce the noise levels, because I don't necessarily have 80 dogs out in the yard all at once. Again, they are rotated. I have a lot of dogs. I take care of a lot of dogs that not one single kennel in the surrounding areas would ever go near because they are difficult dogs, or they have insulin needs and they need to have insulin every 12 hours, or they have all sorts of meds that need to be taken care of at all times, and you need to be on them, and you need to make sure these dogs have these meds because they need to be on them to be safe and to survive. So I can have 20-something dogs or more inside, and that still counts as my 85 dogs. So there's not that many out there. And again, I have an indoor area and an outdoor area. I have that area air conditioned and I have it heated. And I have it so that usually half the dogs are inside and half the dogs are outside, and they go in and they go out, and I've got multiple employees that, again, keep tabs on the dogs and are very good, and everybody takes very good care of these animals, and we are trusted with people's babies essentially. And I am just completely ruined that I've been dealing with this all year, and I love every dog that I have met and every single human that I have met that goes along with them, and I have a very good connection with everybody, and I would just like to keep the business that I have and that I bought.
Believe me, I've used the Red Barn myself, and the dog has come back not barking or not hoarse, but that was more than 3 years ago. Okay, so
I use Chuck myself.
I'm encouraging the Red Barn, but at the same time, we've got a problem to solve.
And I am very much trying to do that with all of the accommodations that I am proposing and suggesting. And again, I appreciate people understanding and saying it on my behalf. You understand that I just bought this business. I am a new owner. Like, I can't go and spend millions of dollars to enclose these areas and do things that people are proposing, I guess. Anybody else have any questions for me?
No. Sure.
Scott Ellis again. I just wanted to sort of address the, the proposal of the 8-foot-high sound barrier, the Acoustiblocks barrier device that is being proposed by Red Barn. And I think certainly if you look at that website, you'll see kennels where this product is used and has been used effectively to reduce noise. The key, though, to this is looking back at what Jeff said earlier about the angles of sound and the distance and the width of the area. So, you know, none of us are sound engineers, and I sort of feel that if there is going to be this potential solution for sound and noise through an Acoustablock device that can be applied to a fence to allow for the Red Barn Inn to continue with outdoor dog daycare, then there has to be an engineering component to this to verify that the angles, based on the size of the kennel, would be appropriate for sound reduction. You know, what I saw on the website showed fences that were much taller than 8 feet in areas that are certainly no larger than the current outdoor area. It may be that an engineer would say, these need to be 16 feet high, these need to be 12 feet high, and it needs to be less than the 30 some odd feet width. Maybe it has to be 20 feet. Maybe the kennels have to be boxed out so that there's control of a few dogs in each of the box sections with acoustic fence between each of those areas. Maybe those sort of things would reduce the sound sufficient enough to return to the ambient noise condition that we experienced prior to these past 3 years. And I just want to clarify that the complaints that we filed have been over the last 3 years. It's not just since Audra bought the purchase of the place. It's been prior owners to this. The barking issue has been going on for a long time. We have tried in numerous occasions to address the issue directly to the various owners, including Audra, and have met with a lot of resistance. We are not against the Red Barn Inn. We're not trying to shut down the Red Barn Inn. I think there can be a solution that allows the kennel to operate at the 80 dog limit that they are proposing. However, the condition for that approval should be based on sound scientific information and engineering information that gives us the best chance that 80 to 90% of that dog barking noise, because dogs will bark, we know that, will be contained in a proposal. I don't believe, and I'm not a sound engineer, but I don't believe, based on what little reading I've done, that an 8-foot-high acoustic block fence surrounding a large area of space like that is going to accomplish that, which to me would be a waste of her money when something, a different design would achieve the end result that we're all looking for. Thank you.
Go ahead.
My name is David Broden. I'm from Kennebunkport, and my two dogs go to the Red Barn, and we can see that we talk community a lot, the community of Kennebunkport, and as we can see, that this community is bigger than Kennebunkport, than Kennebunk, because there's different towns around here using the Red Barn, and I'd like to see if we can find something to make sure the Red Barn stays successful. Thank you.
Just one quick thing, if I could. As to the sufficiency of that acoustic fence, the way this would work is once it's installed, if there is still loud, disruptive barking, the neighborhood could make a complaint. And under the noise standards in the separate ordinance, the police department would come and have that sound measured. And if it was not sufficient to prevent violations in the noise ordinance, then the business would be in violation. At that point, we'd have to look at other solutions. They could involve a second layer of fence, a taller fence, fewer dogs outside, more rotations, whatever else those modifications could be. But again, that is for the police department to determine whether there's a violation. The town has already set what unreasonable noise is by decibels. No violation has ever been found. And if there ever were one, the owner gets the opportunity to address that in all sorts of different ways. And they may involve, all of the things that I just enumerated. But that doesn't mean that the site plan review board, if it had the authority to consider noise, has to prejudge whether this is going to be effective or not. Because the noise standards will handle that enforcement after the fact.
Do you mind, Mr. Chairman? So we've, as neighbors, we've really tried today to keep emotion out of it and our frustration levels. At this point, I would like to comment a bit on, if you look at, we're frustrated with how we've addressed the noise with the town. We're frustrated with how we've addressed the noise with past and current owners. And up to this point, the unwillingness of the attorney, she was just up here saying that the sound, the noise issue is not in your purview, when it is, proving their unwillingness to not be a good neighbor and willing to do the right thing. I reached out to Acustablock. I wasn't going to get into this, but I reached out to Acustablock. Their letter to you guys saying that they've done extensive research on this is the right product. I reached out to Acustablock this week, and all they've done is submit an online inquiry. They haven't had any talks with them, so they're submitting to you a product without having an engineering firm take care of it. And as Scott said, that's something that we, as neighbors, we want Audra to not waste her money on something that's not going to work, and they say, well, let's try it, and then we're going to continue to have complaints. We've been dealing with this for 3 or 4 years. We've been tortured for 3 or 4 years. The next step needs to be something that's going to work, because it's going to be a financial burden on them. So let's not have a financial burden, have it not work, and then be back in the same place, because then it's going to be really messy. And to the point of it's the police department's responsibility, many neighbors have called the police multiple times, including myself, and the police department says it's the code enforcement office's responsibility to enforce the sound of a commercial business. They will not touch it. So do not leave it on the neighbors and the police department to deal with this. It needs to be a structural means to contain the noise. You heard from everybody, dogs bark. We hear it all day, every day. All we ask is the noise be contained within the facility. Reasonable request from neighbors. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Dr. Simpson, and I would like to confirm that yes, I have spoken with the company, and yes, I do have things in motion, and I never submitted an online quote ever. Interesting how he would have that information, but also the 15 dogs, I'm just going to reiterate that, would shut the business down. If I were to continue with whatever 2009 was proposed, that would shut the business down, because that's not the business that I bought, so.
You guys all set for that? Because I'd just like to have maybe Ben just address the fact that we do not consider sound in our review, just so that everybody's clear of, I guess, where we stand, probably a good way to put it.
Sure. So, this is a request for the amendment of a site plan review application for an existing site plan that was approved in 2009. And As you know, Site Plan Review Board reviews site plan proposals and proposed amendments to existing site plans under Article 11 of the zoning ordinance. And you apply the standards that are included in Article 11, Section 8. And I think it's accurate to say that there is not a specific standard in that section that requires or empowers you to look at the generation of noise on abutting properties or the generation of noise by the proposed use. You've heard argument tonight that perhaps you could look at the standard that requires adequate buffering, which is a standard that you will be looking at, to include issues surrounding noise. It is true that the term buffering is not defined in the zoning ordinance. We've looked in many places, but in those cases, there are a number of ways that that boards like yourselves can interpret what that term means. You can look at a dictionary definition. We can present you with dictionary definitions if you would like that. I can tell you, just my own personal opinion, they don't provide much light on the situation. You also heard from Attorney Collins that if you read the section of Article 11, Section 8 that deals with buffering, if you read it in context and read some of the ways in which buffering could be achieved to meet the standards of your ordinance, that those standards generally look at visual buffers. That's another side of the coin that you would have to grapple with. So I suppose, while I'm not going to get particularly into that issue, I'm happy to provide additional guidance to the extent that the board would like to delve into the issue of what is buffering within the context of your site plan review ordinance and what requirements, if any, you can impose as part of that. But what I will say is that you do not have a standard definition, and so we'll provide you with options and coach you through those as best we can. There's also talk of the noise ordinance, and I do agree, you've heard a lot of statements on this, but the noise ordinance in Kennebunk is a standalone ordinance. It is not one that the Site Plan Review Board enforces, and it does not inform your analysis of whether or not the proposal before you conforms with the standards in Article 11. It is enforced by either the Code Enforcement Office or the Police Department, depending on the zone in question. There are decibel limits in place. That is an alternative avenue for the town to enforce complaints, and there have been complaints. And I think it's safe to say that the original choice of staff was to pursue a resolution to this issue in this way first. But one thing to keep in mind is that regardless of this board's decision, and regardless of whether or not acoustic fences are maintained and their effectiveness, the issue could certainly arise in the future that that those devices or measures are ineffective. But again, that is outside the scope of this board's review. So I think directly to your question, Mr. Chair, I do not see noise as a criteria that is required to be demonstrated in terms of compliance, and looking at the generation of noise and what effect that may have, for better or worse, is not within Article 11, Section 8. And I do agree, whether you would like to or not, it's up to town meeting in Kennebunk to change the confines and the conformities of your zoning ordinance. And until those changes are made, this board is tasked with applying the ordinance as it's stated and as it's written right now.
Thank you.
Nothing, Mr. Chair.
What was it about process you said?
Your microphone's not on.
No, so process from here would be that I certainly have not prepared any kind of findings or notice of decision for you on this until after the public hearing, and wanted to see where this board wanted to go with it. You could certainly table the application tonight and carry it over to another meeting for your discussion and your deliberation to determine how you want to, whether you want to approve it, whether you want to deny it, how you want to handle it. I'm certainly not prepared this evening to give you any kind of findings of fact, even in draft form. And I think it seems like you folks now have some additional deliberation and discussion to consider and how you want to try and handle it. If you want to give us direction on looking at sound consultants or anything like that, now would be the time to also give us that direction. And then we can start doing our research on that.
I guess that was part of my question. If we can't consider sound in our review, we really can't request information.
That is
true?
correct. That is true. The only two and to dovetail off from what Ben had said, excuse me, about the whole noise issue, and it's back on my original memo as well, is if you look at Article 10, Section 19, kennels, the only two performance standards that exist for kennels is that kennels located in the rural conservation district and the rural residential district shall be on lots of at least 3 acres, which this is, and that any part of a kennel designed for or used for outside activities, including but not limited to dog runs and outdoor pens, shall be located at least 50 feet from any property line. And the applicant has mentioned tonight about a relocation of a fence to make sure that that 50-foot buffer or that 50-foot distance from the property line would be met. So those are the only two performance standards that exist in the zoning ordinance for you to measure as part of a review or approval of this project.
We're between a rock and a hard place.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
So I do understand the performance standard, but I also understand, and you folks have in front of you, the conditions that were placed forth in the 2009 approval. So the board does have the authority to put in conditions of approval. And some of those conditions from 2009 most of them related to sound. And whether or not the sound is directly your purview, there are conditions placed in 2009 to address sound. And you can place conditions, as I understand the rules, for approval outside of the 2 essential performance standards that are listed for kennels. Am I not correct in that? And if so, how is it that the 2009 site plan approval was allowed to have conditions that included concerns for sound?
I have a thought.
So I'll take those 2 questions separately. It is true, very much the case, that this board can impose conditions of approval. In my opinion, those conditions of approval need to tie directly to the standards that are conditioned, either one of 2 things. Either the performance standards that apply to this particular use, which you just heard from Lee J, relate to the size of the parcel and necessary setbacks from abutting properties, or the approval standards and criteria, which we talked about earlier, that are in Article 11, Section 8. Conditions of approval are typically used to require more specific actions to be taken, which this board feels are necessary in order for the applicant to meet its burden of proving that it has met all of the required standards and criteria that are in your ordinance. As to the 2009 approval, I certainly wasn't there at the time. It can often be the case that conditions of approval can be agreed to by the applicant, In reading the minutes that have been submitted, it seems likely, although again, I wasn't there, it seems likely that that was the case. I think there's actually a letter that was submitted by the applicant at that point where those conditions of approval were laid out verbatim. One way or the other, conditions of approval, if they're unchallenged after 30 days after the original approval, they are in effect and they are enforceable. But the fact that a condition of approval was put into place likely at the agreement of the applicant in 2009 doesn't require this board to keep those conditions of approval in place. And the fact that there were conditions of approval related to noise imposed in 2009 doesn't necessarily mean that they should have been, or that they would have the same weight or enforceability, or that they wouldn't be challenged if they were kept in place or modified by this board now. So sort of rest on the analysis I provided before, again, is that I think the focus of this board should be less on what was done in 2009 and more on what I think the scope of its authority is here, which again is to, I'll narrow the scope a little bit, and if Lee J has other thoughts on this, that's great too, but this is an amendment to a site plan approval, and so I agree with what's been said before, is that you are not looking at this anew. You are looking to see what has changed on the ground between 2009, which is the date of the original approval, and the proposal that's before you. You had site plans and drawings and renderings that were submitted as part of the original approval, and you have a set of similar drawings, including a professional scaled site plan that had been submitted here. And so I think, to summarize, what I see as your task from a legal perspective is to compare those two, to highlight specifically what the changes are, and you've heard testimony from the applicant, from the applicant's attorney, and from others about what they believe has changed over time. You are able to approve those physical changes to the site, provided that those changes since 2009, including changes to the size of buildings, the layout of the site, and its use, are all still within, found to be in conformance with Article 11, Section 8, which are those approval standards and criteria. And so that's really your job. And again, we're here to provide answers and guidance as you move through that. But I suppose on procedure, it may be helpful, especially if you're not planning on going through full deliberations, and I know it's getting quite late, we can either suspend any deliberation until the next meeting, and Lee J at least can have an outline to work through with you, or if you'd like to have some initial deliberations to give everybody over on this side of the table, I suppose, a better idea of your initial thoughts, you can do that too. You're not obligated to do that one way or the other. You have noticed a public hearing tonight, and it'd be perfectly appropriate, given the hour and the amount of information that you've taken in, to give that a little time to digest before doing more. But that's ultimately up to you.
I think that's a good plan of attack. It's almost, well, it is 10 o'clock. And we can, do we have anything for our next regular meeting? At this time? Not yet.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
Sure.
So the way I'm understanding this is in 2009, there was a site approval that was granted by the committee.
Staff review.
Staff review, which is not your committee.
Right.
Okay, so.
It's the town staff.
All right,
It's
so
the
there
town
was,
staff.
so 2009, there was an agreement that's been on the books, and now we're in 2024. Who was responsible to hold people accountable, not just Audra, but the previous owners, hold them accountable to the 2009 agreement that's been there ever since? We're asking for a change, but who was responsible up until this point to hold people, the owners, accountable to what was agreed on by the neighbors that were there and by the owners that were there. And further, the second question I have is the definition of buffer. The definition of buffer is going to be a debatable thing, but I heard you say, and I'm going to ask for clarification, your definition of buffer was more of a visual buffer or a aesthetic visually buffer. And I'm going to ask you to consider visual and hearing are equally important. And so when you're talking about a buffer and you're considering it's visual, does it look good? I'd ask you to consider, does it sound okay for the people that have to live in that neighborhood? So those are my two questions. I think the word buffer needs to be defined, and I think it needs to be considered that hearing is just as important aesthetically as visual. Thank you.
I think the question that was asked about who's responsible for ensuring compliance with the plan, and ultimately that responsibility lies with the applicant. It's their job to adhere to the approval. When the approval is not adhered to, the enforcement action occurs through the code enforcement office. Similar to what has happened with this process, if there is an alleged violation, the code officer will investigate it, make a determination if in fact it is a violation. It would issue a notice of violation, which is what did happen here. In part of that process, they provide an opportunity for the alleged violator to cure the violation. That's the path they are on today, to try to remove or remediate that action. And then if that can't be done, then they proceed to the path of enforcement, which could ultimately be legal action. Monetary fines typically is what happens. That's almost always what happens here. Usually, if things change over time, we try to get them back in order. If landscaping dies as part of our buffering, we notify somebody and they have to replant it. It's usually corrective action, not like things have grown off the rails or done something different like that. But generally, most of these things that happen, if there's compatibility that occurs, they don't get too far out of bounds. If there's things like specific hours of operations that change, they come back and say, if conditions change, what do we have to do that way? So there's kind of two parts to it. Every applicant is bound to this. An approval runs with the land, so that although the owner from 2009 went through this part, it is the responsibility of all successive owners to understand those approvals and abide by them. And then ultimately, when there is an issue that arises, the town looks at what is approved, and that's what they would take for an enforcement action. We like to call it compliance, where we do all we can to get everybody back in bounds. And then when they can't get in bounds, we figure out what that next step is. So we are in a compliance phase of that. But what I will say is that perspective of how we approach things, we do not do routine checkups on things. Lots of times conditions may say shall submit to the code officer. When we get things like annual submission of things, that becomes challenging. Hopefully, more often than not, if there's a performance standard that you review things under that is not working. Now, if somebody has a parking lot and there's overflow parking, they're out in the street, we know those things instantaneously. So when there are situations that things tend to become incompatible, it usually doesn't take many years for us to know that. I think a great example of this is the fact that there was a specific condition put to it. No matter what the number of dogs there may be on that piece of property, it's highly unlikely that we, as the town staff, are going to know that, because our day-to-day routine operations do not check in on that. So when there are specific conditions like that, those are what are most problematic for us to kind of adhere to and follow. And then sometimes when we're looking at it, it's always after the fact. So trying to cure something that has already occurred but may not happen in the future isn't really a reconciliation of things. So that's kind of a very long answer, but I think it exposes the challenges with the process. So that's generally why we like to have conditions that can be satisfied, not be burdening a property from an ongoing basis.
I guess just a Phil Pitcock question for you, Chris. You stated that when you receive a complaint, the code enforcement office goes out and investigates. Is that correct?
I would say what they do is they try to validate whether the complaint is legitimate and worth pursuing. I would say we tend to prioritize that in different ways. Health, safety, and welfare are the priority complaints. Sometimes there are things that may not always arise to that level, so I would say I don't believe we satisfy everybody in our process how we do that, but that is how we do it. We do not assume everything is a violation from the get-go.
So, can you speak to specifically as to whether or not you have investigated any of the 7 complaints that I've made to your office directly over the last 2.5 years?
I can. That's not really germane to this process specifically, but what I can say is we have an online database. We record those. The actions that are investigated are uploaded to that, and then we usually have a corrective action or follow-up statement that goes with that. I will say I'm sure many people are unsatisfied because the staff's ability to become proficient in noise monitoring, that is not their expertise. I think if you read our noise ordinance, that's where things become very problematic and probably why we have not been in that situation that has been able to bring resolution to it. I do know, I will say this, when staff went out to investigate it, they found they were part of the cause. They went out to sort of try to see dogs and they made the dogs bark, and I think they found themselves in a very, well, it was an unproductive situation, so I think that's a problem we have in terms of meeting your needs as a citizen.
But at
I
no
don't think we're
point,
doing it well.
at no point in your investigation did you come to my house or interview me or take sound measures or any kind of evidentiary findings from the property from which the complaint was generated?
I would not say that, and I'm not aware of staff directly communicating with you. I am aware of staff at time going to certain areas and trying to collect some noise information. What I think they found was a lot of different stuff that it got beyond their level of expertise to deal with that. I think they heard airplanes heading to the airport, they heard cars going by, and when they got to the level of them trying to operate within their ability, that's well beyond their capability of dealing with that. And that also, it complicated matters worse. And I think what we know is noise is an issue at some point. Dealing with it isn't going to best be dealt with a staff member and a noise meter and saying, oh, what's that? That's actually become very unproductive. So I'm well aware of those concerns. I don't think people are satisfied with how we're dealing with it. I don't feel that we have a great resolution to it. I know there's work to be done with that. That unfortunately is a little bit of an offshoot of this process, and I don't expect anybody to accept that as being satisfactory to them. We know that. I understand that completely.
Just a quick follow-up. I just want to make note here that we attempted to utilize noise monitoring through the town. We attempted to incorporate the town in our 2-week noise monitoring program that we did. The noise monitoring program met all of the town standards for noise monitoring. It did not involve a person standing there with a meter for 5 or 10 minutes of the day, where there may or may not be dog barking, or where someone may elicit dog barking by being in their view. We performed a 2-week study under all the standards of the town. We presented that to the town. The town refused to accept that because they did not perform that study. So it's a catch-22. We had asked the town to perform a noise study. They did not. We performed a noise study with the data that is verifiable. That was refused by the town. And when asked who we should call about enforcing noise, we're told it's not the police, it's the code enforcement. The code enforcement officer came out once, in my recollection, to evaluate the sound situation there, and obviously stood in front of the dogs who caused barking and couldn't get a valid reading with a noise monitor. So the problem that we have right now is that you're being told that you cannot consider noise. We're being told that noise is addressed through the noise ordinance, and that we should notify the police department or the CEO, which we've done for 3 years with no success in getting any monitoring or any resolution until finally the notice of violation occurred, which was based on the dog number only. Dog number equals noise. Whether you have the ability to look at noise or not, dog number equals noise. More dogs, more barking, more noise. It's preposterous to think that after 3 years of dealing with this unsuccessfully with the town, that this possibility is that this will be approved with no consideration for and no conditions of controlling the noise that is going on there is beyond me as a taxpayer. And the other question I have, the other concern I have is that this has the potential to be approved as a major increase in size from the 2009 site plan review, and it's still being, even with 12,000 square feet of kennel space, it's still considered a minor site review, and that all of the previous stipulations and conditions that were presented in the 2009 agreement could disappear. You have the right as a board to continue those conditions of the 09 agreement if you should approve this, and you have the right to add other conditions. And I think this is more than just about, we've tried everything, believe me, to try to find a solution to this issue. And in every situation, we get no response from the town, we get no cooperation. So we spend our own money to do a complete survey. That isn't accepted, and still the noise issue continues. So what I'm hearing is that this can be approved, and we will still have the same noise issue tomorrow, or whenever this gets decided, as we had before. We will go through this again at our expense, at our cost of quality of life, at our cost of sanity, because for lack of applying conditions to allow for neighbors and a business to live in coexistence in quality. And that's all we're asking for. The kennel cost $1.4 million. The fence is a fraction of that cost. If done right, it could solve the problem. And I think, they're on the right track. It looks good at 6 feet, and that means they don't have to add any more fence height to their kennel to achieve that hanging of the Acoustablock fence. But there needs to be some way of verifying that doing that is going to make a difference. Because otherwise, we're forced to just go through this ad nauseum forever. And that's unfair to property owners, to taxpayers, to people who live in this community, work in this community, contribute to this community, because of a lack of ability to do anything about it. And it's really, you can hear the frustration in my voice, and all of us who are here tonight. We just want peace. And there's got to be a way that this board can address that and provide some form of assurance that sound can be, that the issue can be addressed. Because we've run into roadblocks everywhere we turn. Police say it's not their problem. Code enforcement doesn't come out to see it. Now there's not one code enforcement less. We're not high priority. Well, mental health is a high priority in today's world. And the people who live on as abutters are suffering because of this. And if there can't be conditions, then the board has the option to deny this application. I don't see how this changes otherwise. Thank you.
I'd like to ask you a question.
Sure.
Would the neighborhood be willing to share that 2-week acoustic study with the applicant's acoustic block fence engineers?
Absolutely. In fact, we had previously shared that study with Audrey when we met with her this summer. We'd be happy to share that study.
Audrey?
Actually, I don't need that shared, but I do need to say that, yes, they bombarded me and came over to me and handed me a huge packet of paperwork when they did, I don't know, weeks after I bought the place, it seemed, and with all of the documentation from the town and everything. I also want to just touch on one other thing, because I've heard multiple things of them being harassed. We get called quite often. We get calls when we have orders for the holidays, we get sworn at, we get told to shut the dogs up over and over again. So we are not the only ones that are, they aren't the only ones being harassed. We are constantly harassed by people, and my staff is taught to treat it accordingly and, be nice and to go on their merry way and continue to take care of the dogs. But I just wanted to make sure that I at least said something about that, because I have been dealing with that all year as well. And I don't know who it is, because it either comes from block numbers or something, so it could be anywhere.
But my question was, would you be willing to take that acoustic study and share it with your acoustic block
There,
engineer.
We're gonna take the company's recommendations, and if we wanna hire an acoustic specialist ourselves, we'll do that. We're not gonna take a study that was prepared by a neighborhood that is not the business that has to deal with this.
You want to repeat the cost of an acoustic study while you have one that you can begin with?
We're gonna take the advice of this company who has used these fences for this application, and I actually have an email I'll forward to the board where they said that 8 feet would be sufficient. So.
Yeah, but they didn't see the acoustic study from the neighborhood that said it was a half mile away.
But the acoustic study from the neighborhood is talking about an unfenced condition.
Yes.
Right?
It's unfenced, and how do you...
So the question is, will the fence address
You take the
noise?
engineering information and you use it in the design of a fence. And if the fence has to be 10 feet, you'd rather know that now without spending more money by using the existing study. If you want to criticize the existing study, then you spend more money and do your own study.
I think that would be the wiser way to spend money. Would be to have our own professional who we trust, who we've selected, and who we can ask appropriate questions of, and work with our contractor on the fencing. I think that would be money well spent.
It's not working with the neighborhood.
Nothing has been in place. We are proposing a solution.
Do you, I get from, you seem pretty confident in this fence, or that will solve the problem.
We're starting from a position where there's been no documented violation. If we had a documented violation, then I would be more concerned probably than I am. But the fact is that right now, no one has shown us that the property is in violation of the noise ordinance. And it's the town that measures that. So yes, the company who has, again, used this fence in this application is telling us that 8 feet would be sufficient. And what they say specifically beyond that is that it needs to be above the level of the observer. So they refer to a 6 foot tall person, a 6 foot fence not being sufficient. So we'll look at the topography and all of that, but at a certain point, you can't, enclose the ceiling of this kennel too. And so, there's only so much that can be done. I support put it in place and see how well it works. And if it doesn't work, if there's risk of a violation, we will address it. Also, I'm sure that the company would love to sell us another 4 feet of fence. So I'm not really that excited about people telling them that they should sell us another 4 feet of fence just because. We good?
Yes.
Excuse me. So one thing I'd like to add. I think the board here has been able to experience a little bit of the absurdity, the situation that those of us in Westwoods live in. Being told that nothing can move forward in terms of mitigation of noise until there's notice a violation that's been created and given to the applicant. As you've heard tonight, there are multiple complaints that go to the code enforcement office and to police that are not acted upon.
Complaints are different than violations.
Yeah.
It's not a violation, it's a complaint.
I understand that. They have to do their due diligence. Also, I'm talking. Where are you talking right now? Get out of here, man. So at the end of the day, we're in a position where the arms of the government that are supposed to be doing the things that would allow us to enjoin this activity, we're unable to access those because there are elements that do not work together, police that aren't working, code enforcement, no one knows exactly who's supposed to do what. And at the same time, we as private citizens are enjoining this. We cannot in the state of Maine sue for public nuisance. Only the town can sue for public nuisance, and your attorney will tell you that to be a fact. So we're stuck here in a situation where we cannot take personal legal action, only the town can do that, and we're being told that the town can't do anything because there's no investigation or follow-up that's being done on the part of police or code enforcement. It's absolutely absurd. I mean, it's like catch-22. It's crazy. Thank you.
Albert, I would agree with your question. I think, if I were gonna do something to improve the noise situation in a kennel I owned, I would want some sort of engineering assessment, whether it was through Acoustablock or somebody else, to assess the dimensions of the kennel and what a 6-foot fence would do to reduce noise. We've shown diagrams that would be based on the 10-degree angle, that it's going to do very little to reduce noise, whereas a fence that was perhaps 12 feet, 16 feet, whatever, I don't know, or segmenting that up in a way might cost a little bit more money in the short term, but would solve the problem in the long term. And I can't imagine anybody thinking about trying to reduce a noise situation without utilizing some sort of official noise engineering report to assess the validity and the ability for that to achieve its intended result. And so I think it would certainly behoove Red Barn Inn to engage a sound engineer, to look at the current dimensions of the kennel, and to look at what a 6-foot high Acoustablock fence would do in terms of reduction of noise. And I think they'll find that there needs to be higher fencing and smaller, it's common sense. You don't have to be an engineer to kind of figure that out. That Acoustafence is designed to absorb vibration and thus control noise. If the sound is going over the fence, it's not going to do any of that. And so it needs to be high enough to capture the sound going up, and to, basically what it does is it prevents sound from moving, absorbs sound going out, and the sound just goes vertical. But it has to be of the appropriate height to achieve that. And to your point, why would you spend money on something that's not going to solve the problem when you could do the research and the engineering portion of it at a very small amount to choose to pick a design that would solve the problem and allow your business to do what you want to do? Thank you.
One more, sorry. I realize we're starting to go around in circles here on some of this, but as I mentioned before, this is akin, I think, to a site photometric plan where an applicant needs to provide the light fixtures, where they're located on the site plan, and then the photometric is run, and it's usually done by the lighting engineer who provides that information. Then a drawing is generated, and it shows the resulting foot candles and all the various locations of the site plan. So this would be the same type of thing, and I would think that would come through an independent noise engineer. And if the applicant were to hire, my question would be, if the applicant were to hire an engineer to do that, and there's probably a dozen products out there similar to Acoustablock that do same kind of thing, like there typically is with most construction products, that they may have a wider array to choose from. But then my question is, would the town be doing a peer review of that report if the applicant were to submit that? And then also, just the last item I have is that I do think the consideration for the increase in the number of dogs is 15 to 90. There's a direct link there to noise. So I think thank you.
It's not uncommon that the town has had peer review services done, but it's almost always been relative to items that are under review in the board's jurisdiction. So sometimes we have peer review done of traffic, sometimes we have peer reviews done of wetland delineations. We generally have an independent review, which, in myself, when I review things for stormwater, I'm not affiliated with the applicant. I'm looking at the ordinance and I'm using professional standards that any engineer is going to follow. So I would say, yes, the town is always interested in bringing in an expert to do something. Those costs usually get passed along to the applicant. I would say I cannot ever think of an instance where we have brought in a peer review to do something that's not under the purview of the ordinance, though. So if noise was part of this review process, we certainly would do that. I'm not saying if we weren't talking about this and somehow at some point in time I suspect noise is going to be dealt with by the town in the applicant if there is an ongoing issue. It's very likely that there would be an independent person qualified to do that. I don't know that I would invite the board to do that here tonight because it's not part of your review. If the applicant says, I'm not amenable to that, you're introducing something here, ultimately, that's the problem you've got. The other thing I think I would say, and unfortunately, sound design practice is you're gonna start with some set condition and you're gonna try to get down to some baseline condition. You're gonna attenuate something. There's no established originating condition that we know of. There's a report that had been done for something, but ultimately whoever's gonna do that, I'm sure when they go through, they're gonna establish some threshold saying, my sound level is this and I wanna get down to this. It's like you're chopping off the top of the curve, so to speak. I think it would be remiss for anybody to rely upon some report that, God forbid, if it's too low. So, I mean, in some ways, if noise is an issue, well, this is not the correct forum to do that. Stepping back and look at those operational conditions that they arrive at, and I think that's been a struggle the town has had. Ultimately, why the town did not try to pursue a noise violation is ultimately if there's more than 15 dogs, you're trying to mix something up. I think people offer some testimony that's very hard to refute. The more dogs, the more noise. Possibly. Maybe you can kind of see where that could happen in some circumstances, but it's all operational pieces. How they choose to operate the kennel, they may have dogs that don't bark, and that is not what we know. And I think we have to be very careful on the enforcement side of it to leap to some conclusions. I don't dispute that people have had challenges. They've communicated that very clearly to the town. But when it comes to proposing a solution, I think you have to understand what's happening. If she were to step back and agree to some lower threshold for dogs, and I'm not even going to put a number out there because it's not appropriate for me to do that, you then would try to understand what is being generated with that and then work backward. What we do know is under the noise ordinance, there is a threshold at the property line you need to get down to in a residential zone. During the daytime hours, it's 55 decibels. During the nighttime, it's 45. What we don't know is where it's starting at. So I think that's got to be part of that discussion. That is not my expertise, nor do I think it's the board, so we have to be careful about trying to create that. And I do think, I'm sure the applicant has indicated some desire to get there, and as they pursue that, I'm sure ultimately what they don't want to do is say, we just agree to 12 feet and all's good, and everybody is happy in the room tonight, we walk away, and guess what? We still have 58 decibels at the property line. I'm going to tell everybody I'm doing no one in this room a disservice if we agree to that tonight, because that's not how it works. Nobody, the applicant would spend money, everyone would feel like something's going to work, and it may not, and we still have the same issue. So stepping back, unfortunately, I don't believe you have the authority to dictate that, but when there is a resolution focusing on noise, that's how you do it. You try to identify where it's going to be and put some practices in place, and I think that's part of where the challenge may be. If it's a separate conversation with the applicant, is how we get there through that. One thing that's really hard is it's a little bit like this. The town, believe it or not, the dog park went through site plan approval many years ago over at 36 E Road. Noise was never considered as part of that application. Should it have been? Well, technically no. It's not in the ordinance. Could there be some challenges? Perhaps at some point in time, if there's issues with noise at the dog park, we don't go back to the site plan and say there's an issue there. There was no threshold on it. We would look at the noise ordinance and try to figure that out, or what other avenues need to be put in place. So you folks are in a terrible position because you have a vehicle to deal with that's ignoring one aspect of it because it's not equipped to do that. And I'm sorry for that, and we know that. But I think it wouldn't be fair to try to just make everybody feel good and agree to something. If we took that study and said, oh, 12 feet is the recommended height, let's put it in place, everyone walk away, I don't know that we would really feel that's working. That's like saying I've got a bunch of drainage, but just going to dig a big pond and it's going to work. That's the thing I think I want to be very cautious about. Does there need to be some other efforts to address the noise? I think so. I think people can acknowledge that. But I don't know that this is the correct forum to do that piece. Does that say you should increase the number to 90 dogs? No, it doesn't. I'm just saying the two are tracking, but they're not intersecting, and that's the challenge you have here. I also would say this. I'm sensitive to the fact that this has been ongoing for a long period of time. We do have an open notice of violation, and it's not fair to the neighbors, to be quite honest with you, because we have said, we're not going to address the noise issue until we really understand what's creating it, and if it gets, magically they agreed to go down to 15 dogs, I think they suggested that's not the case, maybe the noise goes away. So at some point, I think there has to be a step back. It's not going to happen tonight. We can generate some draft findings that say some things, and the applicant may want to step back and decide what they heard and do a little bit of exterior conversation, but even still, in any approval we put forward, I don't think we would be putting forward findings that are putting forward anything to do with noise. Let my attorney very tell me to turn my microphone off, but that's just not how it's set up to work, and try to introduce that now could be problematic. Certainly will be problematic, I think.
I think that I'm not going to reiterate everything that Chris has said and everything that we've said before about the lack of the noise standard in your site plan review ordinance. The one word of caution I would have for the board also is I understand the desire to broker a solution in this venue that works for all parties. I have to unfortunately agree with Chris wholeheartedly that this site plan review process is likely not the appropriate vehicle to do that. And I argue that what happened in 2009, like we talked about before, is that there were some conditions agreed to by the applicant then voluntarily. I think it's fair to say also that they were under no obligation at that point to agree to those conditions. They did so voluntarily, not because likely they were not going to receive approval if they didn't, but it was to memorialize the plan that they had presented to the staff review committee at that point. That's not an obligation of this applicant, and you have an obligation as a board who's sitting in a quasi-judicial capacity, which means that you are taking the application and you are applying the facts as presented to the standards that are existing in your ordinance. And so I share Chris's concern about going down that path. I can say though, of course, that despite the challenges that code enforcement have, you have an exacting noise ordinance that has standards that are set to decibel levels. That presents, this is just commentary I suppose, but that presents challenges and benefits from an enforcement perspective. The benefit I suppose is that you have a concrete standard for code enforcement or the police department to enforce, but the way that that needs to be measured, and it does need to be measured by town staff or a town agent in order to be likely, at least, admissible in court if it were ever to go to that point. There are very strict guidelines in your noise ordinance about how it needs to be measured, and the town certainly can take steps to do that in the future, and that is the vehicle that exists to address those noise concerns. If I'm not going to make any representations for the applicant, I know better than to do that. Certainly, if there is agreement on the applicant's part about what they would like to propose and have that memorialized in the site plan, they are certainly free to propose that to the board, as was the case in 2009, but they're not under an obligation to do that. And like I said before, I think the board needs to carefully apply the concept of conditions of approval and ensure that those conditions of approval are directly tied to the standards that need to be met here, not just a concept that you've been hearing overall. So happy to put a finer point on that point. I will add also that in advance of your next meeting, we'll present you with a short but hopefully thorough memo on the concept of a buffer, the definition of that, and what the outlines of those are in your ordinances, so you can have a good understanding of what that may or may not entail when you're putting findings together. So you'll have that in advance of your next meeting.
I have a question for the applicant. When we were out at the site walk, you had some site plans that you were going to bring into the town hall, and we get our packet on Monday. I don't believe those were in it. And then we got a notice, an email that had a different plan. And was that email the plan that you had?
I brought it right down right after the sidewalk, and
So
Chris had.
what was the second?
So the plan that was, I think, presented the site plan and dropped off the next day at Town Hall, or maybe even later that afternoon, it had made reference to the acoustic fence. What we had asked was clarification in terms of where it would be applied. The supplemental agenda we put out, I think it might have been Monday afternoon, we asked them to be clear where it was, and they had then amended the plan with a note to suggest it would be in all areas of the fence. What I think I nicely was saying is, please don't say you're going to use it, but not tell us where. So they had very promptly addressed that. So the plans that are last reference, I think it says Survey Revision 3, has a note and makes reference to that. That's what the updated plan was. It's not an extension of it, just saying it's going to be applied on all the existing fence. So that's why that changed that way.
And did that plan have the exterior lighting on it?
I don't think so.
That's a separate submission.
We have, so from the original, or pretty close to the original, we get notes on the light fixtures, we all full cut off, and that's what we have. And we don't need anything on the septic system that says it's okay for 80 dogs.
Correct. The dogs do not generate waste that should be going into that system. I don't believe there's a design threshold. The system is based on number of employees, and there's no employee count relative to the number of dogs that we go through our process. So it's adequately designed for the facility as outlined. If they choose to have more employees, that could be problematic, but typically the employee count of 15 gallons per day is very minimal, as opposed to in a single-family dwelling where you have dishwashing and washing machines and those types of things. So that, and with those things, it's very likely to have an impact because employees work shorter shifts.
So washing the dogs and all that doesn't...
Well, I would say this, if they are washing it and then it's going into that system, usually what you would do is you would look at a different type of design, but I'm not aware of how they've done that. We can confirm that to the extent that it happens. Sometimes when you get an alternative design in here, I don't believe in public water, you can look at water usage records and point that and size your system off of it. But what we do know is we've not seen any malfunctioning in the system, and what I had recalled from some other time is there was the ability to put in an expanded system as well. So there don't seem to be any issues with the capacity to serve it.
So, should I close the public hearing or keep it open for our next meeting?
That's entirely up to you. The one thing I would say is, generally speaking, if you're going to close the public hearing, then what that means is that you're not going to receive any additional information, written or spoken, and that you have what you need in order to make your decision. There's nothing that prohibits you from reopening the public hearing at that point, but when you reopen, if you were to reopen a public hearing, that requires noticing. It also requires that, just like tonight, you give everybody, not just a subset of people, the opportunity to continue to speak.
But if I continue it, it doesn't require notice.
Correct.
And we can...
Just close the next meeting.
Yeah.
Correct. If what I'm picking up on is that the board is satisfied and you feel like you've done your work for tonight, you are certainly able to continue the public hearing. You would just table the matter at this point until your next meeting, and then you essentially pick up where you left off, which is the public hearing still being open. That would also allow staff to provide some draft findings for you and some additional information, and then next month we move through that and perhaps reach a resolution, perhaps not, but that's up to the board.
Then I'd like to keep the public comment portion open, just because there's a lot of people that are interested. And if nobody has any more questions on something we have to do.
As a point of order,
Sure.
would you mind being willing to put a deadline on written submissions, just so there's not a raft of information presented on the eve of the next meeting that we're then stuck having to respond to at the last minute?
That's a good point.
Helps us a lot, yeah.
Yeah, well, usually what they do is all information has to be into the town 2 weeks before or something like that. So it has time to be processed by everybody.
Yeah, I think
we kind of got away from that.
Oh, well, in general, what we do is, and I think that's very one-sided toward the applicant. I think from the public perspective, if I hear what Attorney Collins is saying, and I would agree to some point, there wants to be a point where they have the information in hand and they can respond to it or be prepared to respond to it for that next meeting. So I would suggest that if the meeting is going to be on April 18th, right now, with no new applications aimed that way, we can get the agenda out a little bit sooner than the Friday before the meeting. Probably a week prior, if we would at least aim for something like that. I think that gives us enough time to, unless that seems unreasonable. I'm not envisioning a whole host of new information coming. So at least that gives enough time that we can at least get it in their hands and give them a few days and get something back. Unless you're anticipating a redesign of the site, which I haven't heard any of that conversation tonight, there's not likely to be additional review from staff or other people that way, but at least a chance for the applicant to review it and respond to something, and that would be the same for the public.
So I think you would just specify on the record at this point that the board will only consider written submissions of additional written submissions from members of the public up to a week before, so that'd be April 11th. Certainly, if you're going to keep the public hearing open, folks would be able to show up in person on the 18th to provide input in person, but I think that seems perfectly reasonable from a just a logistics perspective.
Okay, so that's what we'll do 1 week before.
Thank you. And then the other thing would be if there's any ability to truncate individual comments or prevent redundancy. It's just, we're under violation. We're trying to get it taken care of, and there's some urgency, and a filibuster could allow us to stay in violation longer than we really need to be. We've heard a lot of repeated comments, and there's been a lot of time given on both sides, but I think the points have been heard.
So Gary, on that point, what I would say is this. I mean, certainly this board and you as the chair have the authority to set ground rules like that, the classic 3-minute rule or things like that. I think what's important though, you've had a noticed public hearing. Everybody who wished to submit testimony, written or oral at this point has had that opportunity. You're going to continue that for another day. You're certainly not required to set any sort of ground rules or time limits. If you're considering doing that, though, I think it's very important at this point to make sure that that is clear as of tonight for anybody who's anticipating doing that in a month's time. And of course, that sort of ground rule, a time limit or something to that effect, of course, needs to be applied across the board and consistently to everybody who may wish to speak, whether they've spoken tonight or not. So, again, if you're thinking on doing that, I suppose it'd be preferable to make that clear tonight, but at a minimum, it needs to be made clear at the beginning of next meeting. Certainly not at not where we get to a point where we've thought that we've just heard enough, and now you're going to apply a 3-minute rule. It just needs to be consistent from the beginning of that meeting going forward. So,
well, I have no problem applying a limit. I would just say Henry and time. We haven't used for many years, but if
that's a request of the applicant, that's not a request that you're required to entertain or to go with. You certainly have heard a lot of testimony tonight. I'm not going to express an opinion one way or the other. I think that's completely within the purview of the board to do it one way or the other, so long as it's being applied uniformly across the board.
It's never a great idea that I try to clarify what the town attorney says, but the one thing I want to do...
Time is also limited to Chris.
Yeah, fair enough. We've heard the word of it's under violation. I think I want to be super sensitive to all parties here. The applicant who has been issued a notice of violation, technically there are monetary penalties that can be applied. The town is not trying to do that. The town is approaching this from a resolution standpoint. What we identified to them, and they did do, is they very promptly applied for the meeting in November. Okay, so when they were issued that notice of violation in October, we held them to that 30-day standard. They did promptly apply. In our traditional process, as you know, you folks tend to work through applicants pretty quickly. I don't think we envisioned this was going to be a 6 or 7 month process. What I will say is, on the neighbor side, they are not getting this thing resolved either. So just that piece, it is an abeyance. So while I think we did hear probably most everything we're going to hear to sort of crunch it down so that we can work towards some kind of objective would be a nice goal just for everybody. I would dread to think we're having another meeting in May because I don't know that each time we're going back and redoing some things. So that's a little bit where that comes from.
Could we just limit it like a half an hour?
Big discussion?
Yeah.
Half an hour each? That'd be a long time.
I just don't want to.
I know the only thing I would say to you is you never know what you're going to get for information. I think what Ben alluded to is if you're getting repetitive commentary, right? And I don't think you know, you have to kind of read it, but you've sort of, I think what you did tonight was very generous. You gave everybody a wide open forum to get it out there. To try to, if you're articulating to everybody, come prepared to speak and try to think how to get your remarks out in a set amount of time. I think you guys would tell me to do that, and I'd have to rethink how I do things. But the ground rules have been established moving forward. That, I think, is a fair way to do it. To suggest you want to limit it to a half hour, now you're going to say, well, all right, is it half and half? That's getting a little difficult. And that's up to you to decide, but I can see some challenges with that.
If you were to ask my preference, not that you've asked it, but I'm going to give it anyway. My preference would be for you to set, if you're going to set a time limit, to set a per person time limit. And then once you feel, and hopefully setting that time limit and the fact that you've heard a lot of testimony tonight will mean that next meeting will be somewhat abbreviated on that point, and that when you feel that you've heard all the information that's been said, that you close the public hearing and you stick to that. I think that's the easiest way to do that. My concern with setting a 30-minute time period, of course, is that that can lead to a situation where one side of the issue, so to speak, feels as if, if someone got up at the end, they had something important to say, but they're at minute 29 and a half. That leads to, it creates unnecessary issues.
Okay, so let's do that, 3 minutes. We'll continue the public hearing till next meeting. And when we open it, we'll go over some stuff ahead of time, then we'll open the public hearing. 3 minutes, limit 3 minute comments. We'll close the public hearing. That works? Yeah. We do have other stuff on the agenda tonight.
You do have some plans to sign. I think I made reference to that.
You're all set.
Yeah, so you may recall, and I think there's just something that got lost in the shuffle. We do have plans for the center we can sign after. We do have plans for the public services garage. Back in June, you issued that extension. They did get their permits from the state and federal, so that should be all set. I think one thing I noted, it's for the board to understand, you may be aware we have an open charter commission. In the discussion about that, there's been some question, not so much a solution, is do we need a planning board or do we need a site plan review? And I think that topic had come up. There's going to be a joint workshop between the select board and the planning board. It's going to be a little bit abbreviated next Monday from 6 to 7. I don't think it's fair to exclude you from that. You're all welcome to attend, and we didn't notice it as an official meeting the same way, but at least wanted you to be aware of it. What I intend to do is help them understand from the ordinance perspective the timing constraints you have, the types of applications the planning board sees and those timing constraints, and if someone just says, well, we have one board do it, what it means, we would have a capacity issue. But I think they need to hear that. Ultimately, that's all just going to be some thoughts that probably would go back to the Charter Commission to try to resolve it and do it some way. If there's thoughts and comments you folks have about something, I would be happy to introduce that. You're welcome to attend and share your thoughts. I think it's just more educational at one side, and then what does it mean? You folks, I would say, sometimes you've been pretty active for a while, which is good, but for a while you were pretty dormant too. So that's harder. It can lead to that moment of saying, oh, why don't we just merge those two together? What I do think is another piece of conversation is, because the planning board has also been very busy with development and review, they have not done a lot of their ordinance amendments, so they don't really have a lot of extra capacity to merge together too. I think there's this thought, and that's going to be a lot of the message I'm likely going to convey. Not that I'm going to say I love serving two boards. Each has a very specific purpose. So I think in terms of that, I can't tell you where it's going to go, but I wanted to make sure that had been communicated. It sort of came very quickly, like, oh, well, we should do that because it's been lingering around. But whether you think one representative is enough to do it, if you all want to attend, I would say we should technically notice it since you would be participating, more than 3 of you, but I didn't want you to not be aware of it, more importantly. And you might love being on this board so much, you say we love our Thursdays. Tonight was a great example why you want to be here. So that's just the last piece there.
I think I'll go. I'm just.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm planning on going.
Okay, good. Yep. If any others do, I think it would be, like, we could put out a notice just formally. We issue the planning board agenda. The select board is already going to be attended. It's been noticed as a joint meeting, just for the sake of knowing you'll be there. I am not in any way suggesting anybody shouldn't come. You're welcome to. That's the point of tonight, to make you aware of it. I don't know that it turns into some giant roundtable. It's probably going to be more just me trying to lay out, here's how many applications each board seen over a period of time and what it means, and then some of the ordinance constraints with it. We do, as you've seen, we have some very, because the newspaper noticing, and Gary, you kind of reminded us a little bit, is once an application is complete, we generally had to try to schedule that public hearing within 14 days. You can just see that it's almost like this rotating 2 weeks that the planning board does. There'd be some challenges, I guess is what I'm saying, but nevertheless, that's the only other topic going on.
That whole 14-day thing was initiated by the EDC to help businesses move through the process faster.
Yeah. My sense probably is there ultimately needs to be more study about it, because the thresholds that are set in terms of staff review, not from suggesting they should change, but probably there's more things that would come into those types of conversations and delve into it deeper. It seems like now is the time, but maybe we just need to introduce some language in the charter that allows for creation of other boards or something like that. But I think that topic kind of came up and then moved to the discussion point. I don't see a conclusion, not in my mind, but maybe other people do.
Somebody want to make a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Good, we're all done. We got to sign the plan.
Yes, they're right over here. Don't turn off the camera.
I say my 10 cents before you all disappear from the room. It doesn't have anything to do with this. It has to do with the function